Once upon a time, in a world full of dragons, there lived two brothers who were always competing with each other. When they entered the academy to become dragon slayers, nothing changed. But it wasn't exactly a fair competition. The older brother Aesir turned out to be a real genius. Yet the MC of our story, Rude, could never reach his brother's level. No matter how hard he tried, he was always behind, and because of that, he hated his brother. When they graduated from the academy, they went to the battle with dragons together with their friends. There, in the last battle with the remaining dragons, the older brother sacrificed his life to save our hero. Rude simply could not forgive himself for hating his brother for so many years. But he didn't have much time for regrets. Rude was seriously wounded, and the last dragon lord appeared in front of him. Of course he had no chance to win alone, but he took this last battle with honor, hoping to avenge his brother. The dragon lord used a devastating spell, and in its flash, our hero died. But as always, the story didn't end there. He regressed back in time and found himself back at the academy again. As he sits lost in thought, a red-haired female first-year student approaches him. Her face is instantly recognizable. Henneth Hapley, one of the friends who died in that catastrophic battle. Her presence startles him, and he instinctively calls out her name. She looks surprised, prompting him to quickly explain that he recognizes her because she ranked first in the entrance exams and is already popular. Henneth, unimpressed by the explanation, remarks that he seems almost crazy, muttering to himself like someone deranged. She adds with her usual bluntness that while the school has its share of eccentric students, she has never seen anyone as peculiar as him. Her rude comment stirs memories of her sharp tongue, but instead of reacting, he smiles faintly and lets the insult slide. She's his friend after all, alive and standing before him. Without hesitation, he takes the seat beside her. An announcement echoes through the hall, signaling that the entrance ceremony will soon begin. As the students settle into their seats, Henneth casually reveals that she comes from the Hapla family, a prominent lineage of magicians known for their mastery of magic. Her pride in her heritage is evident as she speaks, though her tone carries an edge of arrogance she seems unaware of. Henneth mentions that she knows Rude's name, Rude Donatos, and acknowledges that he comes from Desol, a remote countryside town. She admits she hasn't heard of it, her words bordering on another insult regarding his lowly background. However, she catches herself this time, realizing she's imitating her mother's condescending manner of speaking, which has often gotten her into trouble with others. To her surprise, Rude appears unfazed by her tone. His calm demeanor disarms her, and she quickly tries to amend her words, offering him help if he ever needs it. She changes the subject, pointing out some of the notable figures in attendance, including leaders of famous guilds scouting for new talent. Rude listens, already well aware of what these guilds will accomplish in the future, and the tragedies that await them. He even knows which guild Henneth will eventually join. Holy Flames, the top-ranked guild. When he mentions this, Henneth is visibly surprised and explains her reasoning. She admires Rihanna, the charismatic leader of Holy Flames, who is renowned for her dazzling white flames and celebrated as one of the strongest pyromancers of their time. Rude remembers how much Henneth idolized Rihanna in his past life, viewing her as a guiding light. He also recalls the grim events that followed. After Rihanna was killed by a dragon lord, Henneth succeeded her as the leader of Holy Flames. Henneth ultimately avenged Rihanna by defeating the dragon lord, but it came at the cost of her own life. Shortly after, Henneth, as the top-ranking student, is called to the stage to recite the oath. Rude watches intently, noting that events are unfolding exactly as they did in his memories. Anticipating what comes next, he waits for his big brother, Aesir, to step onto the stage as the student council president. However, the moment takes an unexpected turn. Instead of Aesir, another figure ascends the podium, Jeremy Duville, who introduces himself as the student council president and delivers the opening speech to the freshmen. Rude's chest tightens with unease. This isn't how things were supposed to happen. Aesir was meant to hold that position, yet here stands Jeremy, Aesir's best friend, addressing the crowd in his place. Confusion churns in Rude's mind, and he struggles to comprehend his brother's absence. When the ceremony concludes, Rude approaches Jeremy, determined to uncover the truth. He asks directly about Aesir, but Jeremy's response chills him to the core. Jeremy doesn't recognize the name. He doesn't know who Aesir is. A terrifying thought flashes through Rude's mind, one he can hardly bring himself to accept. In this world, his brother Aesir might not exist. The school bell rings, marking the end of the entrance ceremony. Freshmen begin to disperse, heading to their first classes, but Rude remains rooted in place, his mind racing with questions. Two possible explanations occupy his thoughts. Either Aesir's existence has been erased entirely, or his brother has also returned to the past with his memories intact and decided not to attend the school this time. Henneth approaches, noticing his distracted expression. She asks what he is thinking so hard about. Rude replies that he is looking for someone. Henneth, ever quick to offer advice, suggests he make a request to the Information Guild or check the library since the missing person is likely a student. Before she finishes speaking, Rude abruptly heads toward the library. Henneth, annoyed at being ignored, follows behind, complaining loudly about his lack of manners. When they arrive at the central library, Henneth stops in awe, marveling at its intricate architecture and grand design. Rude, however, is focused and asks how she knows where the library is on her first day. Henneth smirks, replying that she memorized the school map before arriving. Rude doesn't respond, heading straight to the records section. He has never been to the library in his first life, but he knows what he is looking for now. Scanning the records, he searches for any mention of his brother. His efforts yield nothing. No records, no name, no evidence that Asir ever existed. A chilling realization dawns on him. Rude suspects this is the work of Sartnan, the Dimension Dragon, known for wielding power over space and time. Memories of their final expedition surface. How Sartnan disappeared with Asir's body. If Asir isn't dead, Rude reasons, he might have been transported to another timeline. Sartnan too might still be alive, hidden in some other dimension. Henneth's voice cuts through his thoughts. He turns to see her arguing with the librarian. She is trying to borrow 17 books, but is informed that freshmen are only allowed to check out 3 at a time. The librarian also reminds them that they should be in class. Grumbling, Henneth reluctantly selects 3 books and left with Rude. They are in the classroom when Henneth prompts Rude about whether he has found any information on the person he is searching for. He hasn't, and she advises him to seek assistance from the Information Guild. He reveals that he is looking for his older brother. Before the conversation continues, the teacher enters, introducing himself as Daniel Gulda, the combat instructor for the year. While he explains the structure of the school years, the students murmur among themselves, their admiration evident for Daniel Gulda, a renowned top ranker and widely popular figure. As Daniel speaks, he assures the students that discovering their talent and dedicating effort will ultimately be rewarding. Rude reflects on these words, recalling the immense suffering and humiliation he endured in his past life while trying to uncover his own abilities. When the class ends, Rude quickly leaves and heads to a training ground he used frequently in his first life during his younger years. He begins a set of pull-ups but quickly realizes how frail his current body is. Thoughts of the upcoming sparring class in just a week remind him of the urgency to improve. Determined to change the fate of his past life, Rude resolves to make better progress. He decides to focus on building his strength and stamina, recognizing them as his key assets. While training, he notices another student nearby. He recognizes him as Balak Steros, someone he knew in his past life. A friend, much like Henneth. Rude knows Balak Steros as the warrior who later earns the title King of Fists. However, in this timeline, he never encountered Balak at the training center before. After his midterms exams, Rude spent most of his time there, and he only met Balak at the new center. He wonders if something has gone wrong with the timeline but decides not to dwell on it, focusing instead on his own training. As he continues his exercises, he notices that Balak is staring at him, copying every movement and using even heavier weights. Eventually, Rude can no longer ignore it and asks if Balak is trying to pick a fight. Balak responds that he's simply exercising, but he finds Rude's form perfect and has been trying to replicate it. He remarks that Rude's movements are beautiful and that he's never seen anyone in his family, not even his father, with such precision. The two introduce themselves, and Balak then asks Rude if he can be his guide in exercise from now on. He claims that someday Rude's body will surpass his own in muscularity and definition. Rude bluntly refuses. Meanwhile, at the Irradium Outdoor Training Grounds 3, various weapons are displayed on racks. Professor Daniel stands before the first-year students, instructing them to select their weapons. The students begin making their choices. Rude picks a sword, and as he does, he notices Henneth speaking to Professor Daniel. She asks if she needs to choose a weapon, given that she plans to become a magician. Professor Daniel explains that there are many variables in combat, and even as a magician, she will need a weapon for self-defense. Rude then advises Henneth to choose a dagger, explaining that it suits her best as a magician. He mentions that she can use magic to adjust its length, making it easy to carry around. The reason behind his advice is that he knows from his past life that Henneth is especially skilled with a dagger, and it often came in handy during unexpected moments in battle. Henneth agrees and selects the dagger. As Rude swings a sword, Professor Daniel immediately notices and is impressed. He never expected such skill from a student. Henneth suggests that Rude try some other weapons, but Professor Daniel is already struck by the swing he just saw, which appears to be the perfected strike of a skilled swordmaster. Rude approaches Professor Daniel and asks if he can choose multiple weapons. Daniel observes Rude's confidence, wondering if he's trying to show off or if there's a deeper reason behind it. He decides to keep an eye on Rude for the time being. Rude then picks up a spear and makes a perfect arc swing, which shocks Professor Daniel. Next, he chooses a longsword, and demonstrates more skilled and precise swings, leaving no doubt in Danil's mind that these are the three main weapons Rude will focus on. Professor Danil is taken aback, sensing something unique about Rude. His techniques are swift, precise, and his sword strokes clearly reflect experience. Unable to hold back his curiosity, Professor Danil asks Rude what he did before coming to the academy. Rude replies that he was a mercenary, having to make a living after his family was killed by a dragon. Professor Danil immediately apologizes for prying into something so sensitive. Henneth, having overheard the conversation, asks about what was discussed with Professor Danil. She apologizes for also bringing up such a personal matter, surprising Rude. He has always seen her as blunt and straightforward, never expecting that she could show kindness at times. A confrontation is unfolding between a professor and a student in Class B, with Balak and Professor Mason at the center of the argument. Professor Mason insists that Balak choose a weapon, but Balak stands firm, declaring that the Steros family does not use weapons. His resolute stance frustrates Professor Mason, who is left fuming as he is eventually dragged away by Professor Danil. Meanwhile, Balak notices Rude and approaches him. Henneth, surprised by the encounter, asks Rude if he is friends with Balak. Rude denies it, but Professor Mason, still seething, watches Balak calmly approach Rude and strike up a conversation, which only intensifies his fury. Balak, however, tries to explain the odd relationship between him and Rude. Rude quickly acknowledges that they are, in fact, friends. Professor Danil steps in, addressing Balak's situation. He explains that even though the Steros family may not use weapons, it is a part of the curriculum, and as a student, Balak is obligated to participate. If he refuses, he will be expelled. Rude is shocked by this, as in his past life, an exception was made for Balak. He wonders if the timeline has changed, realizing that things may not be the same as they were before. Professor Danil explains to Balak that refusing to pick a weapon could lead to failing the class and potentially being held back. Rude becomes worried, realizing that if Balak is held back, they will lose one of their greatest fighters, someone they need to fight the Dragon Lords in the future. Balak, though resolute in protecting his honor, is willing to accept expulsion over compromising his family's principles. Rude, desperate to avoid this outcome, pleads with the professors to make an exception for Balak, recalling how an exception was made in his past life. However, the professors remain firm in their stance. Eventually, Rude notices a pair of wrist warmers and tosses them to Balak, urging him to take them as a gift from a friend. Balak, still hesitant, reluctantly agrees. Rude then assures the professors that the matter is resolved, as Balak has now chosen a weapon. Despite the resolution, Rude makes a mental note that his actions in this life could change the course of their futures. Later, Rude, Balak, and Henneth are seen walking together. Rude checks the class schedule and realizes they have plenty of free time. He knows that the first week at the academy is designed to help first-year students adjust to their new lives, but it's also when professors analyze student abilities and scout potential talent. Having made sure to stand out to secure a strong recommendation letter for the future, Rude decides to use the rest of his spare time to prepare for the upcoming sparring class. Henneth is seen bickering at Balak, scolding him for being an idiot and trying to protect his honor at the risk of expulsion. Meanwhile, a group of 3 first-year students approaches Rude and Balak, with their leader, Willem Partey from Class B, attempting to bully them. However, upon noticing Henneth, Willem immediately composes himself and tries to act friendly, introducing himself. Henneth, uninterested, brushes him off. Willem, undeterred, asks Henneth to step aside so that he can deal with Rude and Balak. Henneth, frustrated by Willem's continued attempts to address her by her surname, is about to snap at him. But Rude steps in, asking Willem what exactly he wants. Willem, addressing both Rude and Balak, calls them freaks, implying that they are only desperate for the professor's attention. While Willem's statement about Rude seeking attention is partly true, it triggers memories of the bullies Rude faced in his past life. He wonders if he can handle this situation more maturely than he did before, when he relied on force to deal with problems. Rude calmly responds to Willem, telling him that even if Willem had 500 weapons, he, Balak, and even Henneth would still defeat him. This enrages Willem, who throws a punch at Rude in retaliation. Rude expertly dodges the punch, using his agility to trip Willem and send him crashing to the ground. Embarrassed and furious, Willem draws his sword in a fit of anger, ignoring Henneth's warning about the school rules. Undeterred, Willem attacks Rude with a reckless sword strike. Rude steps back to avoid the blow and, with a flash of inspiration, decides to use a technique that Balak taught him in his past life, the Steros-style bare fist parry. In a swift move, Rude knocks Willem's sword out of his hand and delivers a decisive blow that knocks Willem out cold in a single strike. The surrounding students watch in stunned silence, surprised by the sudden turn of events. Even Balak is taken aback, recognizing the technique as his family's own, never expecting Rude to execute it so perfectly. The next moment, Professor Mason rushes over, asking what's going on. One of Willem's lackeys immediately blames Rude, but Henneth steps in, explaining the situation clearly to the professor. Balak also testifies, confirming Henneth's account. Professor Mason, taken aback, expresses her surprise that a first-year student was able to defeat an armed upperclassman with just his bare hands. She then orders Willem's lackeys to take him to the nurse's office and asks Rude to stop by the faculty office after class. As the situation calms down, Henneth asks Rude how he managed to parry a sword with nothing but his fists. Balak, still intrigued, adds that although the adults in his family know how to do it, he himself doesn't yet. He even jokingly asks Rude if he is a secret little brother of his. Rude, stunned by the question, hesitates but can't reveal the truth, that it was Balak's own technique he had learned in a past life. Instead, Rude casually brushes it off, claiming that he is just a genius. Meanwhile, Henneth and Balak continue to bicker about their relationship, with Henneth rejecting Balak's claim that they are friends. This exchange reminds Rude of how the two always used to argue in his past life, a pattern that seems to continue now. As the bickering continues, Rude quietly decides not to attend his next class. He reflects on how, in his previous life, many of the people he cared about had died, and he's resolved not to let that happen again. Not this time. Rude steps out of the faculty office, having just met with Professor Mason. She had initially planned to scold him for causing a scene, but after Rude's overly humble and pleasing apology, he had managed to disarm her. His explanation was delivered so calmly and with such sincerity that Professor Mason was taken aback, impressed by his mannerisms. She had been more upset with Willem's behavior, and now she was even more convinced that Rude was a proper and kind student. In fact, she was now plotting to deal with Willem when the next training session began, after hearing Rude's side of the story. Meanwhile, Professor Danil arrives at the faculty office for the day's scheduled meeting, where all the first-year professors are supposed to discuss the students' progress. Professor Mason had insisted on holding the meeting in her office because she didn't want to move to another place, which led to a brief but light bicker between her and Professor Arthur Winston, who was responsible for Class D. After the tension dissipated, Professor Danil takes charge of the meeting, starting with an overview of the first year's performance. He states that most of the first-year students are showing skill levels higher than last year's cohort. However, Professor Mason is quick to interject, pointing out that skill alone doesn't guarantee success. Persistence is equally important. Professor Arthur, ever the optimist, counters that it's their job as professors to teach students how to persevere, and that skill can be developed with time. Curious about any standout students, Professor Arthur asks if there are any particularly promising individuals to keep an eye on. Professor Damian Grace, who oversees Class C, responds calmly, stating that his students are generally competent, though nothing out of the ordinary. Professor Mason then mentions that Class B has a bad apple, Willem, and a crazy kid, Balak, who is stubbornly refusing to use a weapon. She recalls that although Balak's written exam was a mess, he stood out in the practicals. Professor Danil adds that his class has two students worth noting, Henneth Hapla, whose family is famous for their magic, and Rude Donatos, who, though relatively new, is already showing potential in multiple areas. As the professors examine Rude's details, they realize that while his written and practical exam scores are average, and his background as a former mercenary with no family seems unremarkable, there is something far more intriguing about him. Professor Danil, who has been observing Rude closely, explains that they might be underestimating him based on his records alone. He believes that when they actually see Rude in action, they'll change their perspective, as Danil is convinced that Rude could be the strongest student in the entire first-year cohort. This remark surprises the other professors, especially Professor Mason, who has never been one to openly praise a student. She, however, shares her admiration for Rude, particularly his behavior during the recent altercation with Willem. She points out that Rude not only acted humbly in front of the faculty, but also demonstrated remarkable skill in taking down an armed student with nothing but his bare hands. This shows that Rude excels in close combat, a trait that could make him a formidable fighter. The professors find themselves in a rare disagreement over Rude's potential, with Professor Danil and Mason almost engaging in a verbal altercation over which of them should retain Rude in their respective classes. Their heated discussion is interrupted by Professor Arthur Winston, who slams his fist onto the table in frustration, demanding they calm down and act like proper professors. The tension in the room subsides as the two professors settle down, and Professor Arthur shifts the conversation back to Rude, asking Professor Damien for his thoughts. Professor Damien, ever the detached observer, responds with indifference, stating that he isn't particularly interested in Rude's potential. His expression, always hidden behind a mask, adds to the aloof aura he exudes, making it unlikely any student would willingly choose him as an advisor. However, Professor Arthur shows a flicker of interest, acknowledging that while Rude's background is enigmatic, it's ultimately up to Rude himself to decide which professor he wants to guide him. As they continue to go over the details, Professor Arthur uncovers something startling. Rude is from Daysol, a village that had disappeared due to the ever-changing incident that occurred a decade ago. This event had catastrophic consequences for the kingdom of Calavan, which lost half of its territory and eventually collapsed, vanishing from the map altogether. The primary cause of Calavan's downfall was the appearance of Dragon Canil, a creature that could transform into anything. Professor Danil, who had been part of the expedition to slay the dragon, recalls the moment with vivid clarity. He recounts how his teacher was the one who eventually killed the dragon, but as a newcomer, Danil himself had only been able to hold down its ankle while the battle raged on. The revelation about Rude's past stirs a deeper question in Professor Danil's mind. Did the tragedy of Daysol and the loss of his village ignite a desire for revenge within Rude? Danil also acknowledges that Rude's talent far surpasses his own at that age, making him wonder just how much potential this young man truly holds. However, Professor Arthur, ever cautious in his assessments, remains skeptical of Danil's conclusion. He suggests that Rude may not actually be the strongest student in the first-year class. Arthur points to another student in Class D, a monster-like genius, whose skills are reportedly extraordinary. This student, who remains unnamed for the moment, could very well be a competitor for the title of the strongest in the year. As the first-year students continue their intense training, Willem is seen struggling under the harsh supervision of Professor Mason, who is relentless in her approach. Covered in sweat and panting heavily, Willem groans as he completes yet another set of push-ups, only for Professor Mason to demand he go another round without showing any signs of mercy. Meanwhile, Rude is finishing his set of exercises, feeling a sense of accomplishment as he notices some progress in his training. His movements are more fluid, and he's gradually becoming accustomed to the breathing technique he had used in his previous life. With only 3 days left until the sparring class, Rude knows that he's made significant progress. Across the training area, Balak is grunting loudly as he lifts weights. The sound of his strained breath fills the air, but it annoys Rude, who is nearby. Rude, irritated by the noise in Balak's form, calls out to him, telling him to stop grunting and focus on fixing his posture. Every time Balak makes those loud grunts, he tilts to one side, throwing off his balance and making his exercise less effective. Balak pauses for a moment, adjusting his posture as Rude instructed, and after doing so, he realizes that Rude was right. His muscles feel more engaged and the exercise is more effective. Grateful, Balak compliments Rude, saying that he's the best teacher he's had. Rude simply nods in response, his expression calm and focused as he watches Balak get back to his training. Henneth, on the other hand, walks over with her nose wrinkled in disgust. She comments on the overwhelming smell of sweat in the training area, jokingly wondering if these two are even human for managing to exercise for such a long period. Balak, ever the optimist, tells her that he could help her build some muscles too, offering to start her off with calisthenics. Henneth rolls her eyes as usual and starts bickering with him about it. Their playful back and forth seems to be a regular occurrence. Rude, deciding it's time for a break, tells Henneth that he's going to grab something to drink. Henneth, curious and eager for a break herself, tags along. Balak, however, is undeterred and continues to focus on his exercises, asking them to bring him a protein shake when they return. Rude and Henneth arrive at the vending machine, and Rude immediately notices a silver-haired woman standing nearby, casually sipping a drink. He recognizes her as Ryan Crail, a master swordswoman with a nearly devilish level of talent, as skilled as a seer. The memories of his past life come rushing back. She is the one who taught him a bitter lesson about how some people are simply more talented than others, no matter what he does. The recollection leaves him irritated, and he coldly orders her to move. Ryan doesn't hesitate. With a mischievous glint in her eyes, she throws her drink at him. Rude dodges it with ease, but before he can react further, she disappears from her spot and appears behind him. A swift kick comes at him and he blocks it just in time, the force rattling him. She follows up with another move, but this time he dodges it, surprising her. She stops, eyeing him curiously, her posture relaxed. There's a slight pause before she realizes what's happening. He doesn't engage with her as expected, simply stating the obvious. She's blocking the vending machine. Realizing the truth, she steps aside and apologizes, albeit a bit flustered. She asks his name and he answers. After a moment of thought, she nods, mentioning she'll remember it before walking off. Rude feels a sharp pain in the wrist he used to block her kick. He tries to ignore it, but the throbbing is persistent. Henneth notices his discomfort and immediately pushes him toward the nurse's office. Though Rude doesn't want to admit any weakness, Henneth insists. He sighs in resignation, reluctantly agreeing to go. Rude is later seen with his wrist wrapped in a bandage, a reminder of his encounter with Rion. News of what happened quickly spreads, as Henneth explains to Professor Danil and Professor Mason that Rude had been beaten by Rion. Professor Mason, immediately riled up, expresses a strong desire to confront Ryan. She has a history of getting into fights with students, and this incident only fuels her frustration. The students around them begin to gossip, and Rude feels embarrassed, wishing that the news hadn't spread. However, Professor Daniel calmly intervenes, trying to ease the situation. He explains that while Professor Mason may want to confront Ryan, doing so would create further complications. If she went to yell at Ryan, it would undermine Arthur's position as the head of Class D, and he would lose his authority to deal with the issue. Instead, Professor Daniel proposes that they contact the captain of the Dragon Slayers, Ryan's guardian, who is known for being especially strict about keeping things professional. With her involvement, it's certain she would demand an appropriate punishment for Ryan. Afterward, Professor Mason could direct the blame onto Arthur, and the situation could be resolved through community service and makeup classes for Ryan. Despite the solution, Rude still feels uncomfortable with the fact that almost everyone knows about his defeat by a girl. Balak, noticing Rude's discomfort, attempts to console him, but Rude quickly brushes him off, telling him to shut up. 3 days later, the sparring class arrives, and the first-year students are asked to line up with their respective classes. It marks the beginning of the combined sparring session for classes A and B. The announcement for the sparring session is made, and each student is assigned an individual number, with the chance to pick their opponent only once. Everyone must spar twice. The professors watch from the second floor, observing the students' performances, while the sparring itself takes place on the first floor. The instructor calls out the first participant, signaling the start of the sparring. Henneth's name is called, and she confidently walks out to the ring, claiming that there is no one who can compare to a real genius like her. Rude watches intently, noting that Henneth, a magician, is the weakest in close-range combat, but has chosen a sword fighter as her opponent. As the sparring commences, Henneth quickly demonstrates her skill. She casts flames, sending a fireball toward her opponent. He blocks it with his shield, relieved that her attack isn't too fast, but before he can act, Henneth is already in motion. She dashes toward him, launching a barrage of flame arrows. The opponent, expecting her to avoid close-range combat, lets his guard down and begins to advance toward her. To his surprise, Henneth quickly closes the distance, wielding a dagger and placing it against his neck. Caught off guard by her reckless fighting style, the opponent has no choice but to concede. Henneth is declared the winner, and her performance impresses everyone, even Rihanna, the head of the Flames Guild, who offers her compliments. Henneth beams with pride, knowing that her victory has earned recognition from someone of such high standing. Rude looks at Henneth after her victory, asking where she got the idea to challenge a sword fighter. Henneth responds confidently, claiming she was just thinking outside the box. However, Rude can't shake the feeling that her strategy is a double-edged sword. If her opponent had seen her closing in, she would have been in grave danger. Yet, he realizes it's her incredible instincts in combat that allowed her to pull off the risky move. Meanwhile, the professors continue their discussion. Professor Arthur, observing Henneth's talent, remarks that they might need to hire a separate lecturer, ideally a pyromancer magician, to better support students like her. Next, it's Willem's turn. He points at Rude, choosing him as his opponent. Rude, clearly irritated, quickly handles the challenge. Within moments, Willem is begging for surrender, clearly overpowered. The medics are called to carry Willem off the stage on a stretcher, his defeat so thorough that it leaves him incapacitated. Rude, not satisfied with his brief fight, decides to stay and face his next opponent immediately. He points to Balak, challenging him to a spar. Balak steps up, refusing to fight at first, stating that he doesn't want to go up against a friend. However, Rude insists, explaining that Balak is the strongest among them and that he wants to see how far his own strength can go. He recalls how, in the past, Balak's presence was enough to shake the earth and collapse mountains with his punches. Balak, acknowledging Rude's strength, finally agrees to the challenge, saying that Rude is stronger than him. He tells Rude that he won't ask him to hold back, but that he wants a real fight. Rude, determined, replies that that's exactly what he intends to do. The Invigilator calls for the duel to start, and the tension in the air grows as the two prepare for their clash. Back in the past, Rude is seen practicing swordsmanship, his movements sharp and intense. Balak approaches, telling him that Aesir sent him because Rude is running wild and needs to calm down. However, Rude, as always, addresses Aesir with defiance, his tone rude and dismissive. Balak, not one to back down, shows his strength, overpowering Rude with ease and delivering a lesson in humility. Back in the present, Rude reflects on his journey, fully aware that his innate talent alone won't take him far. The painful truth has settled in after his defeats to both Ryan and Balak. He knows that without pushing past his limits, he won't be able to reach his goals. The sparring match intensifies as Balak charges at Rude, his powerful dash driving him toward his opponent. He throws a punch, but Rude reacts swiftly, landing a hit to Balak's jaw. Rude follows up with a series of strikes, testing Balak's defenses. Balak grabs Rude's shoulder, but Rude counters, attacking with his free hand. Balak dodges and attempts a feint, but Rude isn't fooled, quickly backing away. Impressed, Rude notes that despite landing several hits, Balak remains unaffected. He understands that as a Steros warrior, Balak's body is built for endurance, with a lifetime of bodybuilding and mana integration making him incredibly resistant to damage. Rude realizes that his ordinary attacks won't be enough to break through Balak's defenses. Rude adjusts his approach, his strikes becoming faster and more unpredictable. He works on throwing off Balak's rhythm, making his patterns harder to read. However, Balak remains confident that his physical defense is impenetrable. To his surprise, Rude's hits are beginning to have an effect. Rude taunts him, urging him to dodge if he can. Balak, recognizing the shift, realizes that Rude isn't just throwing wild punches. He's using a carefully calculated strategy. Rude is targeting the cracks in Balak's defense, delivering soft strikes that slowly wear him down from the inside out. As the battle progresses, Balak realizes that Rude is using the Steros-style punch, a technique from his own family. It's as solid as a mountain range, and as soft as the sea, an unstoppable force that breaks through even the strongest defenses when used with precision. Balak becomes more riled up to defeat Rude at this point, becoming more focused on Rude's attacks. He soon gets familiar with them and responds with a similar fighting style, exchanging punches. Balak realizes that Rude's strength doesn't come from his physical power, but from an insane sense for combat that he possesses, along with a near-perfect mastery of his techniques. He also notices that Rude looks exhausted, so he feels he has the upper hand in physical stamina. Balak decides to end the duel in one blow, but to his surprise, he sees that Rude isn't attempting to dodge his attack. Instead, Rude remarks that they had a great match before making a sword slash. Rude is seen bringing out his sword, telling Balak that he's quite strong before making a slash at him. Balak falls down on his butt, looking stunned. A sword mark tears through his shirt, revealing his chest, which is almost bleeding from the wound. The crowd is amazed by the showdown between Rude and Balak, and even claps in appreciation. Arthur and Mason look shocked, realizing the level of combat prowess displayed by both Rude and Balak. They note the fact that neither of them used magic and fought like professional dragon slayers. Even more surprisingly, they are aware that Rude didn't fight with all his strength. Daniel notices something about Rude's techniques, realizing they somewhat resemble those of Daniel's teacher, Ein Bryce, the Heavenly Sword. He also realizes that Rude already has a perfect technique, even though the school year has just begun. All the professors are now keeping a close eye on Rude. Later, the students are seen in the school cafeteria. Rude is having lunch with Balak and Henneth when he realizes that he's the only poor student among them. Soon after, two guild leaders from Tracker and Twilight Moon appear, coming over to where Rude is. He recognizes them from his past life, recalling that they had already died during their fight against the 7 dragons. Roderick then mentions that his friend Abel has complimented Rude a lot, and that he needs someone like him in his guild. Abel adds that even though his guild is ranked 2nd, it's only because they take on other jobs related to information collection. However, he makes it clear that this doesn't mean they are lower than the top-ranked guild, Holy Flames. Abel then offers Rude a chance to join Twilight Moon as soon as he graduates. Rude questions this, reminding Abel that it's against the rules for guilds to contact students in advance. Abel responds by explaining that some rules are meant to be broken, especially for a talented genius like Rude. Despite this tempting offer, Rude refuses. He thinks it over quickly, acknowledging that a major guild like Twilight Moon could support him, but he doesn't want to be tied to one already. Instead, he proposes an offer of his own. He asks them to find his older brother, a survivor of the ever-changing incident from 10 years ago. Abel, intrigued, asks what he would get in return. Rude tells him that he would have a personal link to him. After considering this, Abel agrees and takes his leave with Roderick. Henneth then turns to Rude, remarking that he must be confident in himself to have rejected such an offer. Henneth asks if Rude is happy with his decision. It is then that Rude realizes they've been given their report cards from the first sparring class. Rude, unsure of his results from the past, feels curious about his current evaluation. Henneth remarks that she already had an inkling of what it would be, saying it would be something good and would surely make his family proud. Rude wonders if she's trying to be considerate because of his brother, Aesir. Balak then asks Rude about Aesir, and Rude responds that Aesir is too kind for his own good. He explains that Aesir has always taken care of him and gave up everything for him until the very end. Rude adds that Aesir is extremely strong and that he's nothing compared to him. Henneth consoles Rude, telling him not to worry too much because Aesir should be fine wherever he is. They then open their evaluation forms. Henneth reads hers first, followed by Balak's, both of which contain excellent remarks about their combat prowess during the sparring class. When it's Rude's turn to read his, he is stunned and can't bring himself to look at it. Henneth grabs his report and checks it out, only to see the signatures of the professors present. Rude heads over to the faculty office, where he finds the professors already waiting for him. They greet him warmly, with each one trying to outdo the others in friendliness, except for Damien, who remains a bit introverted. Rude asks if he's been called to discuss his decision for a personal advisor, which turns out to be the reason for the meeting. After the first sparring class, students are separated into different classes with personal advisors according to their aptitude. In some cases, students receive a direct message from a professor in the form of a signature. Damien points out that it's extremely rare for all the professors to leave their signature for a single student, which proves that Rude showed potential in diverse areas. He adds that now it's up to Rude to choose which advisor he wants. Rude chooses Professor Danil as his personal advisor, stating that he would like to learn sword fighting from him, under one condition. He asks that Danil make him his personal apprentice, explaining that the successor to Heavenly Spearmanship has yet to be selected. Heavenly Spearmanship is a unique blend of mana magic and sword fighting that was developed specifically to defeat Tarragons. It can only be inherited by one person at a time. In Rude's past life, Professor Danil was a student of the legendary Heavenly Sword, who was also his brother's teacher. As a result, the successor to the Heavenly Spearmanship was Rude's brother. Professor Danil is surprised that Rude would suggest such a thing and asks why he wants to pursue this path. Rude responds that he needs power. He reveals that he lost his friends and family to a dragon because of his own weakness. He believes that if he had the power to protect them, things could have been different. From now on, Rude is determined not to go through such a loss again. This causes Professor Danil to recall the tragic incident where he lost his sister to a dragon's attack. The pain and suffering dragons have caused are deeply ingrained in his memories. However, as he listens to Rude's reasoning, Danil considers it carefully. He reflects that, regardless of the pain or suffering Rude has endured, if his desire for power is rooted in revenge, then he would not have the right to inherit the title of the next successor to Heavenly Spearmanship. Yet, Danil begins to reconsider. Rude's desire to protect the people he loves, not simply to seek revenge, makes a difference. He then announces his decision to accept Rude as his personal apprentice. However, Danil suggests that all the professors should act as Rude's personal advisors, emphasizing that Rude has displayed talent in a wide range of skills. Focusing solely on sword fighting would not be wise. If there is a way to further develop Rude's other abilities, it would be worth exploring. Rude is surprised by Danil's suggestion, voicing concerns that it may not be possible and that other students would see it as unfair. Arthur, however, seconded the idea, stating that it was not a bad suggestion. Exceptional dragon slayers are needed to rid the world of these beasts, and such an investment in Rude could prove vital. The other two professors agree with Arthur, adding their support. Professor Danil then clarifies that his suggestion is just that, an idea. Regardless of Rude's decision, they will respect whatever choice he makes. Rude takes a moment to reflect on the situation. He wonders if accepting this opportunity might deprive someone else of a chance. He is unsure of the consequences this decision could bring in the future. However, Rude realizes that if he is to change the grim future ahead, he must step up and take on the responsibility his older brother once bore. He needs to man up, embracing this moment, and agrees to the decision. After all, his biggest wish is to save everyone. In order to accomplish this, Rude knows he must push himself beyond the limitations he once held in his past life. To do so, he must become the very dragon slayer the world desperately needs. Rian is seen wobbling as she exits an independent sparring class, which, unfortunately, was a punishment handed down to her for hitting Rude. 2 hours earlier, she had been put through a grueling session on Faculty Training Ground C, where she almost became a punching bag for the professor in charge. Her thoughts are clouded with frustration and confusion, as she believes Rude must have been the one to tell the professors about the incident. This assumption only fuels her resentment, as she now finds herself saddled with cleaning duty and makeup classes. To top it off, she was scolded by her mother as well. Rude, however, secretly observes her from a distance as she sobs, completely stunned by the sight. The Rian he knew in the past had always been cold and sharp, to the point where he even questioned if she was truly human. Before her mother's death, Rian was just an ordinary girl, and back then, Rude didn't care much about her, as they were not on good terms. However, seeing her now, vulnerable and in pain, he feels a deep sense of guilt, even though he knows he didn't rat her out to the professors. Rude, unsure of what to do but driven by a need to help, approaches her. He asks why she's crying. In an outburst, Ryan accuses him of being a coward, claiming that he went to the professor about a little fight between them, all because he was rude to her. Taken aback, Rude immediately apologizes, handing her his handkerchief. The gesture surprises Ryan, as she hadn't expected him to comply so readily and apologize without hesitation. Rude explains that he never told anyone about what happened. In fact, he's even more embarrassed by the rumors that have spread, attributing them to his friend, who had spoken to the professor about the incident. Rion accepts Rude's apology, acknowledging that she was the one who misunderstood everything from the start. However, she warns him that if he gets her into trouble again, she won't let him off easily. Rude, in turn, reassures her that he will do his best to avoid causing any more trouble, recognizing that she would be powerful on her own, even without his help. To his surprise, Ryan mumbles shyly that he can greet her when they see each other, before hastily walking away. Rude is left a bit confused but continues on his way, only to realize they're heading in the same direction, toward Professor Danil's office. This startles him, as he had always known Ryan to be a student under Professor Mason. Given Ryan's natural talent for sword fighting, Professor Mason had been a safe choice to help her with her weaknesses in close-range martial arts. Rion notices the expression on Rude's face and asks him what's wrong. He explains that it would have been more beneficial for her to learn close-range martial arts, pointing out her fighting style from their sparring class. To his surprise, Ryan reveals that she didn't receive a message from Professor Mason, and even if she had, she wouldn't have chosen him. She claims that he's the one in charge of her makeup classes, which mostly consisted of being used as a punching bag, a sentiment she obviously resents. Rude feels a sense of guilt wash over him, realizing that the future seems to have shifted because of his actions. His decision to intervene has somehow altered the course of things, and now Ryan is on a different path than before. As they arrive at Professor Danil's office, the class on sword fighting begins. Professor Danil explains that both Rion and Rude have reached a level where they no longer need basic practice. What they need most now is independent sparring. Essentially, they will be getting beaten up while they learn, but it's all part of honing their skills. After the intense independent sparring session, both Rude and Rion are sprawled out on the ground, exhausted. They can barely catch their breath as Professor Danil informs them that they'll be switching between group classes and individual sessions moving forward. He then leaves them to recover. Rude, feeling a bit frustrated by his inability to defend himself, is about to wallow in his disappointment when Rion speaks up. She assures him that she isn't angry, explaining that they were defeated simply because they are weaker, and that's why they're here, to learn and improve. In a lighter tone, she jokes that Professor Danil is much kinder than Professor Mason, who's far more violent during independent sparring sessions. Rude feels guilty about the whole situation and wonders if he should bail, but Rion, with a wry smile, tells him that if he's feeling bad, he should just teach her close-range martial arts once he's good at hand-to-hand combat. Rude, unsure about the idea, suggests she ask a professor instead, but Ryan insists that she doesn't have the time to learn both sword fighting and hand-to-hand combat, and besides, she keeps getting beaten by Professor Mason because of him, so it's only fair for him to help her out. With little choice left, Rude reluctantly agrees to teach her. This development surprises him, especially considering that Ryan, in his past life, wasn't someone he would have expected to ask for his help. Yet, he realizes this is a chance to repay her for everything that happened in their past, and it's an opportunity to make things right. As Henneth, Rude, and Balak walk through the bustling streets, Henneth urges the duo to keep up. They're both a bit unimpressed by the idea of going out, but Henneth promises to buy them dinner, which finally convinces Rude to agree. In an attempt to help, he picks up the heavy books she was carrying, but before long, he awkwardly drops them onto Balak, claiming that Balak didn't bring any money. It's a bit of a strange dynamic, but Henneth doesn't seem to mind, and they continue following her as she shops around. Eventually, they arrive at a posh, expensive restaurant, and Rude feels both impressed and out of place in the upscale environment. The elegant decor, the white-gloved waiters, and the polished atmosphere leave him feeling awkward and unsure of himself. When they're seated at their table and Henneth orders the meal, Rude notices the prices listed on the menu. His eyes widen as he realizes that the cost of the food is equivalent to an entire month of his own food expenses. Unable to hide his surprise, he comments, "This is a bit too expensive." Henneth, however, reassures him, saying that he helped carry her things, and if he wants to order more, he's free to do so. Balak, ever the opportunist, is about to take her up on that offer, but is quickly stopped when Henneth points out that he's already ordered enough. Despite her lightheartedness, Henneth's focus seems to be on making Rude feel comfortable, and she turns to him with a smile, asking how the food tastes. Rude can't help but notice that she's warmed up to him since he shared his brother's story with her. In the past, they were more like rivals, and Henneth's tendency to yell at him during their interactions left him with the impression that she was always more combative than kind. But now, her caring demeanor feels strange to him, like it's not her real self. Before he can say anything, his attention is drawn to how Henneth effortlessly dominates Balak, leaving Rude in an awkward position. He quickly changes his mind about what he was going to say, and simply thanks her for the meal, feeling that it might be best to keep quiet and avoid stirring anything up. As they finish their meal, the time slips away, and it's already 8 o'clock. Rude remembers that he promised to help Ryan with her training, a promise he now realizes he's late for. Meanwhile, Ryan is already at the training grounds, growing impatient as she waits for Rude to arrive. Rion is getting pissed off as time keeps passing, and she then thinks about the fact that Rude is the only one with whom she's had an actual conversation. She wonders if he's forgotten about their appointment. Just then, Rude shows up, and she fusses over the fact that he's late. He apologizes, and she catches a scent of food on him. He explains that he was in the capital with his friends for a bit, and that one of his friends bought him dinner. Rion sulks, feeling bad because Rude seems to have a lot of friends, and she's never been to the capital before. Rude hears her and can't help but suggest postponing their training to next Saturday so they can go sightseeing in the capital. Ryan looks thrilled at the idea. Rude then claims that they should warm up a bit. He hands her a pair of gloves and asks her to put them on. As Ryan talks excitedly, asking him many questions about the capital, he can't help but ask her about it. She replies that her mother used to call her a chatterbox. This makes Rude wonder why she was so quiet in the past. He explains that he prefers the Stero-style martial arts, which she can alter to make it easier for ordinary people to use, but it's meant for those with insane physiques. All he can teach her are a few techniques and fighting styles. After all, there's no right answer in close-range martial arts. What matters is that she avoids getting hit and lands more attacks. He says he's going to teach her how to dodge attacks better, and shows her some leg movement techniques. However, she struggles to read his movements as he moves like a snake. He tells her that the technique is called the killing step, a type of stance that allows one to move quickly using only the toes. This minimizes movement in the legs, making it harder for an opponent to predict what one will do next. Rion is impressed when she learns that Rude created the technique himself and remarks that he's a genius. He then instructs her to try out the technique. To his surprise, she picks it up in minutes. He reveals that it took him 4 years to master it perfectly, but she managed it in just 4 minutes. This strengthens his resolve even more. He won't let her or any of his past comrades die. With this in mind, he becomes more strict with the training, urging her to get it together while repeatedly tripping her, almost as if he derives pleasure from it. Later that evening, Rude is seen lying on his bed, exhausted. He reflects on how everything has been going well so far, except for one thing: the change in his relationships with people. The main difference now is how much they've changed, more than he anticipated. He doesn't know how this will affect the future, but it doesn't faze him as long as he can save his friends. No matter what it takes, he's determined to work together with everyone to take down the 7 dragons. To do that, however, he knows he needs to step up, take his brother's place, and the first step in that process is inheriting the heavenly spearmanship. Rude is seen sparring independently with Professor Daniil on the training grounds, using wooden swords. He feels that Professor Daniil isn't fighting as seriously as he expected, though he's not exactly going easy on him either. Seeing how Rude is coping with his attacks, Professor Daniil decides to switch things up a bit and starts using punches instead of the sword. Rude barely manages to block the punches and asks why they aren't using swords. Professor Daniil replies that he changes his mind a lot. Rude, deciding to play it safe, quickly steps back, which makes Professor Daniil wonder if Rude is trying to lure him in. Curious, he decides to fall for it just once to see what trick Rude has up his sleeve. Professor Daniil dashes toward Rude, but Rude changes his pace and blocks the attack, then counters with one of his own. The purpose of heavenly spearmanship, Professor Daniil notes, is protection, as it's built on defensive blocks and counterattacks. In the past, Rude had only trained in the sword-fighting techniques to catch up to his brother, but in order to fully utilize the technique, it requires the addition of skills beyond mere swordsmanship. Professor Daniil remarks that Rude's blocks and counterattacks are perfect, as if he's already mastered them, and declares that it's time to move on to the actual classes. He explains further that heavenly spearmanship is more than just a sword-fighting technique. Anyone can train in that style. However, the application of mana magic is passed down only to its successor, and it's crucial that Rude learns to combine the 2 elements to truly master heavenly spearmanship. Meanwhile, mana is known as the unrefined energy of life, and naturally, it is stored in the heart. However, heavenly spearmanship doesn't follow this conventional method. Instead, it uses a special technique called mana engraving to absorb and utilize external mana. Through this process, the successors draw from a subspace known as the heavenly domain, which has enormous reserves of mana. The heart, rather than acting as a storage space, now serves as a pathway for mana. This method allows Rude to potentially produce and use far more mana, but if he had previously used his heart as a storage space, it would be less effective as a pathway. Professor Daniil then asks if Rude has trained in other application magic before, to which Rude responds that he hasn't. The application magic Rude used in his past life was known as continuous platform, which is based on the magician's mana levels. Professor Daniil then asks Rude to take a seat and begins the magic engraving process on the back of his palm. Rude soon feels the overwhelming flow of pure mana and finds himself transported to a space with a boundless sky. This space is the inheritance of generations of successors, with each of their entire life's work converted into a vast repository of information and mana. As he takes it all in, he hears a voice, but before he can process it fully, he suddenly finds himself back in the training grounds, with Professor Danil asking how it felt. Rude can't quite explain his experience, but Professor Danil is shocked when he sees that Rude has already started drawing mana from the heavenly domain. He wonders how it's possible, as this is a feat that usually takes much longer to accomplish. However, this happens because Rude has already trained in continuous platform in his past life, and his heart now serves as a pathway, determining how far he can go. The extent of a person's heavenly spearmanship capability is expressed by the number of wings on their engraving. Professor Danil has 6, Ain Bryce has 7, just like Aesir, but Rude currently has just 1 wing on his hand. Rude recalls what Professor Danil had told him, that once the engraving is completed, it can never be detached from the soul. Even if a successor dies, the heavenly domain maintains their memories and power. However, when Rude was inside the heavenly domain, he only felt the presence of Professor Danil and Ain Bryce, but his brother's presence was absent. Rude had initially thought that his brother's consciousness might still be connected, even though it's from another timeline, but that wasn't the case. Soon after, Rude comes across Henneth and Balak, who are waiting for him so they can head to the library together to study. As they walk, Henneth asks Rude about his class with his personal advisors. Rude simply replies that it was normal, explaining that Professor Mason and Arthur are just giving him compliments. However, Henneth argues that there's no way it's normal. After all, a huge exception was made for him, and all 4 professors are his personal advisors. She then asks about Professor Damien, who always wears a mask, wondering if he's ever taken it off. Rude thinks back to when he was in Professor Damien's office. He could only take small sips of tea as they sat in silence. The only thing Rude knows about Professor Damien is that he is the first professor to die. A while later, Rude remembers a moment when Professor Damien had asked if he liked the tea. Rude had replied that it had a nice aroma. Professor Damien then explained that it's one of the most popular teas in the Empire and that he also enjoys drinking it, though he hadn't taken a sip himself during the entire conversation. After that, they fell silent for another 30 minutes without exchanging a single word. Soon they reach the entrance of the library, where Rude asks Henneth and Balak about their classes. Balak responds that he likes Professor Mason because she seems to appreciate the beauty of physique, just like him. Henneth, on the other hand, replies that she doesn't have a personal advisor for magicians, so she was assigned to a random lecturer. Her lecturer even told her that pyromancy magic is the least effective type of magic, and urged her to switch to another kind, which she strongly disagrees with, looking visibly pissed off. As Balak attempts to explain that there aren't many pyromancer combat magicians, Henneth directs her anger toward him, prompting Rude to step in and calm her down. He asks if she can just switch classes, but she explains that there are no pyromancer lecturers in Iradium. While they're still discussing, Jeremy Duville approaches, and Rude's mood instantly soured upon seeing him. Jeremy greets Henneth and Balak with a smile, but Rude is blunt, questioning him if he had done a background check on them. Jeremy, unfazed, claims that Rude must be extraordinary for all 4 professors to offer to teach him, and he expresses his liking for extraordinary people. He then invites Rude to join the student council. Rude outright refuses the invitation, realizing from Jeremy's manner of speech that he hasn't changed at all, still acting like he knows everything. In the past, Jeremy's uncanny observation skills had earned him the nickname the Determiner among the Dragon Slayers. However, Rude knows Jeremy's true personality. While not a bad person, Jeremy tends to be selfish and arrogant when making decisions on behalf of others. Rude decides to walk away to find a book, stating that he is not interested in Jeremy at all. Henneth, feeling awkward, nervously apologizes for Rude's behavior, but it's clear that Rude is unbothered by the situation. Jeremy quickly slips something into the book and leaves, casually remarking that he doesn't want to interrupt their study session. Rude returns shortly after, and Henneth, noticing the tension, asks why he's being so harsh on Jeremy. Rude responds bluntly that Jeremy isn't acting like a friend, which Balak agrees with. Later, Rude checks the book and finds a note from Jeremy, warning him to beware of Damien. However, Rude doesn't take the warning seriously. He knows Jeremy's true personality well, and realizes that Jeremy is the one he needs to be wary of, not Professor Damien. After all, it was Jeremy's selfish decisions that led to the deaths of countless people, and Damien was the first professor to die. As Rude and Rion make their way through the capital, Rude's thoughts are weighed down by the past. He recalls how, in his previous life, Professor Damien's death wasn't directly caused by Jeremy, but the pressure Jeremy placed on Damien, seeing him as a threat to the Empire, led to his tragic suicide. Damien's death had pivotal consequences, and Rude feels a sense of urgency to prevent this outcome from repeating. He can't afford to waste any time. Ryan's nagging brings him back to the present as she comments on his being late, not even 10 minutes early. Their arrival in the capital is met with Ryan's excitement at the bustling atmosphere, and she eagerly asks where they're headed. Rude, unsure himself, figures they could just buy some things. Ryan grabs his hand, pulling him toward a clothing store. Ryan tries on a dress, asking for Rude's opinion. His simple response, "It's nice and white," doesn't give much away, but she buys it anyway. To Rude's surprise, she insists on buying him something as well. At first he refuses, but she's persistent, and eventually he's directed by the attendant to try on a shirt. As Ryan watches him, she reflects on how strange Rude is. When they first met, he had picked a fight with her, but after seeing her cry, he apologized sincerely, showing a side of kindness she hadn't expected. However, she notices that whenever Rude looks at her, it seems like he's seeing someone else, which confuses her. Rude eventually steps out in the new shirt, and as they leave the store, Ryan glances at him, noticing how good it looks on him. When he asks what's up, she jokingly questions why he paid for lunch, even though she had told him she would. Rude explains that he had to since she bought him the shirt. Curious, Ryan asks about Rude's life as a mercenary. She wonders if he had comrades he fought alongside, people who were like family to him. She asks if he has experienced his first love, startling him. He yells at her, claiming that those people are more skilled at stabbing others in the back, and that there was never time to fall in love with one another. Rude grows increasingly upset, dreading any more questions she might ask. In response, she insults him further, pushing him to the point where he decides he's leaving. However, she declares that they can't leave yet, saying they still have a lot of time left together. She reveals that she has changed their plans and intends to show him what having a real family looks like. Her implication is clear. She's taking him to her home, the Dragon Slayer's headquarters, to introduce him to her family. Rude and Ryan use the warp gate to travel to Sirene, the capital of the Lavelle Kingdom, located in the west. Sirene is where the Dragon Slayer's headquarters is based. While it isn't as vast as the kingdom's main capital, Sirene is bustling with life and energy. However, according to Rude's memories, Sirene was an abandoned city, and in just a few years, the 7 dragons would attack, reducing it to ruins. That devastating event would mark the destruction of the Dragon Slayer's headquarters, wiping it off the map entirely. When they arrive at the headquarters, they encounter Harold, the gardener. He is startled and overjoyed to see that Ryan has brought a friend who isn't a member of the Dragon Slayers. Harold declares that this calls for a party and banners to celebrate. Embarrassed, Ryan tells him to stop and scolds Rude for smirking at her. Meanwhile, Rude reflects on how he never had a friend in his past life, realizing the irony of the situation. As they enter the building, everyone inside is astonished to see that Ryan has brought someone with her. They crowd around Rude, their excitement palpable, prompting Ryan to shoo them away, her embarrassment growing. For Rude, this is the first time he's seen the faces of the Dragon Slayers. He never expected them to have such a familial bond. Watching them interact, he begins to understand why Ryan's personality shifted so drastically after the collapse of Sirene. It was because of this close-knit family she had once cherished. Ryan brings Rude to the drawing room where her mother, Adeline Crail, the captain of the Dragon Slayers, is waiting. Adeline lights up with excitement at the sight of her daughter, though her initial reaction is to question why Ryan isn't at school. Wondering aloud if Ryan punched someone again and got expelled, she waits for an explanation. Embarrassed, Ryan insists that's not the case and explains she wanted to introduce her friend, Rude. Adeline is visibly startled by this revelation. After all, Ryan has never had a friend outside the guild. Rihanna, who is also in the room, finds the situation amusing and comments on the irony of Ryan, with her near-zero social skills, managing to bring a friend home. Rihanna prompts them to introduce themselves, leading Rude to offer a polite and proper introduction. Rihanna immediately recognizes him and recalls seeing him during sparring sessions, mentioning that he's one of the students worth watching. She inquires about Henneth, to which Rude explains that Henneth isn't particularly fond of the magician lecturers she's been assigned. Rihanna reassures him that it won't be an issue for long, hinting that Henneth will soon have the best teacher possible. Meanwhile, Adeline remains overwhelmed by the fact that her daughter has brought a friend home. She repeatedly thanks Rude and begins explaining Ryan's unique challenges. She shares that Ryan is a little different from other children. Her sharp senses make her highly attuned to other people's emotions, enabling her to analyze people almost instantly. However, this same trait makes it difficult for her to respond appropriately in social situations, which is why she struggled to make friends. Adeline learns that Rude is the student whose wrist her daughter had broken in the past, prompting her to scold Ryan. However, Rude quickly steps in, explaining that he had provoked Ryan, and it had simply been a fight. Adeline then insists that Ryan apologize properly to Rude again, much to his embarrassment, as it makes him feel like a victim who got beaten up. Rihanna, observing the situation, remarks that Rude is no ordinary student. She mentions having watched his fights and points out how effortlessly he uses the Steros family technique. She even notes that Abel wanted to scout him, which surprises Adeline. Adeline, impressed by this revelation, comments on Rude's strength, and Rion chimes in to add that Rude has been teaching her close-range martial arts. This excites Adeline, who immediately declares that she can't let an opportunity like this pass her by. She asks Rude for a sparring match to test how good he truly is. Rude, not surprised by her request, having heard rumors about Adeline's unmatched love for fighting, readily agrees. He sees this as a chance to spar with a top-tier fighter, which would undoubtedly benefit his own skills. The entire Dragon Slayer's headquarters gathers in eager anticipation to watch the sparring match between their captain, Adeline, and Rude. The crowd buzzes with curiosity, wondering how long Rude can last against their formidable leader. Before the match begins, Adeline hands Rude a guild uniform to wear, which he accepts. Ryan, however, appears worried that her mother might go overboard during the fight. Sensing her concern, Rude reassures her, expressing gratitude for this rare opportunity to spar with a third-rank Dragon Slayer. Rion, still uneasy, approaches her mother and asks her to go easy on Rude before leaving the area to let the match begin. Adeline explains the rules. They will use wooden swords as their weapons, and Rude is limited to using only the mana within his body. Vital points are off-limits, and if Rude manages to land a single blow on her, he will be declared the winner. As a reward, Adeline promises to grant him one wish as the captain of the Dragon Slayers Association. With the terms set, the two warriors prepare to fight, both slipping into battle stances. Adeline makes the first move, swinging her wooden sword in a powerful strike. Rude blocks it, and the two quickly engage in an exchange of rapid strikes and counterattacks. The spectators are stunned by Rude's performance. He's holding his own against their captain. Even Adeline is impressed, noting that Rude's sword-fighting skills and refined techniques are far beyond what one would expect from a 17-year-old. However, she also identifies a critical weakness. His physical abilities are not yet on par with his skill level. Taking advantage of this, Adeline launches a series of counterattacks that push Rude onto the defensive. He begins to struggle to block her strikes. Smirking, Adeline taunts him, asking if he's already tired. The provocation spurs Rude into action, and he suddenly employs the heavenly spearmanship technique to launch a daring offensive against her. Adeline is taken by surprise but quickly regains her composure, expertly countering the move and sending Rude flying across the sparring arena. As she resets her stance, she remarks, impressed, that Professor Daniel must have taken Rude as a disciple to teach him such a rare and advanced technique. Meanwhile, Ryan, observing from the sidelines, watches in awe. She already knew Rude was strong, but seeing her mother's genuine happiness while sparring with him is an entirely new perspective. Rude claims he has won the fight as long as Adeline used mana outside her body to block his attack, which is true. Adeline gasps in realization, and everyone around is surprised. Standing by her word, Adeline decides to grant him a wish, as promised, but she quickly adds that there are limits to what she can do, and clarifies that she cannot give him too much money since the association is struggling. Rude responds that he has no intention of asking for money. Instead, he declares that he wants to fight one more round under the same conditions. As they spar for another round, Adeline quickly realizes why Rude requested it. Something has clearly changed in him. She is overwhelmed by his incredible reaction speed, which nearly catches her off guard multiple times. However, she remains confident that there will be a chance to counterattack. Yet, with the way Rude moves, dodging and counterattacking almost simultaneously, it seems nearly impossible to find an opening. His reaction speed appears superhuman, leaving Adeline unable to detect even the smallest gap in his defense. She notices that Rude's abilities mirror those of Rion, with his quick reactions and uncanny ability to read her movements. It becomes clear that Rude is using hypersense, a technique achieved by channeling mana to continuously enhance the body's senses. This skill sharpens the user's perception to an extreme degree, significantly increasing reaction speed and thought processes. However, it comes with a cost, placing considerable strain on the nervous system. In his past life, Rude had been fixated on surpassing Rion, studying her every move. Now, in the present, he exhibits traits eerily similar to hers: quick reflexes and the ability to predict Adeline's movements. Despite this, Adeline has no trouble blocking his attacks. Keeping up her pace, she even begins to pressure Rude, prompting one of the Dragon Slayers to remark that Adeline truly lives up to her title as Destroyer. Adeline starts launching counterattacks, but Rude effortlessly dodges each one. Growing impatient, she taunts him not to keep running. Frustrated, she dashes at him to stop his evasive maneuvers, falling into his trap. Rude executes a calculated attack with his sword, only to release it mid-move. This technique, a core aspect of heavenly spearmanship, is an unpredictable counterattack. Adeline, however, is no novice and notices his intent, deciding to create some distance. But before she can act, Rude suddenly vanishes. He reappears behind her without her noticing and prepares to use the Stero-style earth-shaking, launching a devastating punch. Yet just as Rude's attack closes in, Adeline strikes first, sending him flying. Rude winces slightly from the pain of Adeline's attack as Ryan rushes over to him, visibly worried. She scolds him for fighting her mother as though his life depended on it, pointing out that he could have been seriously injured or even killed. Rude, brushing off her concern, tells her to stop nagging and insists he didn't actually lose. He points out that Adeline broke the rules again by using mana outside her body. Adeline acknowledges this, leaving her guild members stunned by her admission. Curious, Adeline asks Rude what he wants as his reward. Rude replies that he only wants one thing, that in the future, just once, she believes his words without question. Surprised, Adeline asks why. His response is solemn. He doesn't want anyone to die. Moved by his sincerity, Adeline swears to keep her promise. However, she quickly shifts the mood by teasing him, adding that she looks forward to more of their interactions and calling him her future son-in-law. Both Rude and Rion freeze in shock, their faces turning bright red at her unexpected remark. A few years from now, the slumbering 7 dragons will awaken and unleash chaos, with the first to strike being the ever-changing dragon and the lightning dragon. The third one to emerge will be Lauzia, the dragon of delusion, which destroyed Siren and, with it, the Dragon Slayers Association. After a fierce battle, Rude's team manages to kill Lauzia and avenge Ryan's family, but the cost is steep. Both Ryan and their teammates lose their lives in the confrontation. Rude knows that the same battles will unfold again, but he is determined to prevent history from repeating itself. One of the reasons he connects with the Dragon Slayers Association is so he can warn them about Lauzia's attack ahead of time, which will also alter Ryan's future. On their way back to school, Ryan acts nervously, remembering how her mother jokingly referred to Rude as her future son-in-law. Rude reassures Ryan, telling her not to take it seriously and that her mother was obviously just joking. Soon they arrive at Irradium, around evening. As they enter the school area, Rude asks Ryan if she's okay with the fact that she didn't get to see much of the capital. Ryan, however, surprises him by walking with him toward the male dormitory. He asks why, and she explains that she's walking him home due to some strange rumors circulating around the campus. Apparently, there's a pervert who exercises in front of the dorms every night, completely naked. Rude already knows exactly who that is. Balak. Ryan continues, sharing another rumor about a blonde homeless girl who sleeps in the Central Garden's flower beds. Rude asks her to explain the situation better, curious to hear more details. The next morning, Rude heads over to see the head of spiritual arts, Professor Lillian Stout, to discuss one of her students, Lenia Selket. He expresses his concern that Lenia's actions might be causing minor issues, but Professor Lillian quickly bursts out, stating that the problems are far from minor. She explains that Lenia constantly skips classes, sleeps outside, swims in the central fountain, and even throws barbecue parties on the roof by herself. As her personal advisor, Professor Lillian has tried everything she can, but Lenia refuses to listen. Frustrated, Professor Lillian loses her calm, her stress palpable. It takes her a few minutes to regain composure before continuing. Professor Lillian admits that Lenia is an outstanding student, someone who, despite her disregard for rules, has immense potential. Most spiritualists value contracts and structure, but Lenia values her freedom above all else. She has an exceptional talent for befriending spirits, and Professor Lillian believes that if Lenia could focus, she could become a great spiritualist, one even comparable to the professor herself. However, the problem is that Lenia's reckless behavior is becoming a major hindrance. Not long ago, she destroyed an entire training center simply because she wanted to test her spiritual magic. Rude listens, overwhelmed by the idea of Aesir working with someone as unruly as Lenia. He can hardly fathom how she could be so careless with her abilities. Professor Lillian then asks Rude why he is asking about Lenia. He explains that he's concerned an outstanding talent like hers will be wasted if she doesn't get her act together and graduate. At this, Professor Lillian urgently pleads with Rude to talk to Lenia, believing that Lenia is especially susceptible to compliments from talented juniors like him. Rude, feeling cornered, reluctantly agrees to speak with Lenia, swayed by Professor Lillian's pleading. Meanwhile, Lenia is lying on the school fields, completely indifferent to her image. She remarks to herself how wonderful the weather is, unbothered by the rules and responsibilities she continues to ignore. The students observe as Lenia, seemingly carefree, falls asleep on the school field. They chat amongst themselves, commenting on how effortlessly relaxed she seems, to the point where they joke that she doesn't even seem human. Rude, who is nearby, knows they're not entirely wrong. After all, Lenia is half spirit and half human. With that in mind, he decides to approach and wake her up. He nudges Lenia, but she seems content in her slumber. She begins to roll down the slope of the field, eventually waking up in the process. Rude asks her what she's doing so early in the morning. Lenia lazily responds that she came to look at the flowers, but ended up getting tired and falling asleep. When she sees Rude, she asks who he is. Rude introduces himself, explaining that Professor Lillian sent him. He tries to compliment her, saying that he looks up to her, but Lenia, seemingly more interested in something else, leans in eagerly, asking if they can be friends. Before he can respond, she becomes distracted by a butterfly and begins chasing it, much to Rude's frustration. He tries to get her to sit down and refocus, continuing his attempt at complimenting her. He expresses his concern that she's causing trouble and might be at risk of being held back if she doesn't change her behavior. Lenia, however, seems unfazed. When he brings up the incident with the destroyed training center, she responds nonchalantly that no one got hurt, so it's fine. Rude presses further, asking if she's okay with the idea of not graduating if she keeps acting like this. Lenia's response is blunt. She questions why she should even care about graduating. She mentions that this school has pretty flowers, and the weather is warm, unlike her hometown, which is always covered in snow. She'd much rather spend her time enjoying the peaceful atmosphere here than attend classes. Rude, trying to steer the conversation back to the bigger picture, asks if she didn't come to Iradium to learn how to fight dragons and become a dragon slayer. After all, people are dying because of the dragons. Lenia's response is unexpected. She replies that humans also kill dragons, and that she prefers her peaceful life over the conflicts surrounding dragons. Rude, still fuming from his encounter with Lenia, reflects on his words to her. He's frustrated that she doesn't seem to understand the harsh reality of the dragon attacks, especially considering her sheltered life. He's tried to explain the cruelty of dragons and the devastation they cause, but Lenia remains unbothered. He feels like she's too carefree, disconnected from the serious battles being fought by dragon slayers to protect defenseless villages. Yet she takes everything lightly. Lenia's response, however, only irks him more. She reveals that she's attending this school because it's her mother's alma mater, not because she has any real interest in becoming a dragon slayer or understanding the deadly threats to human lives. His frustration boils over, and he storms off, telling her to keep enjoying her peaceful life, which he feels is being made possible by the sacrifices and lives of others. Later, Lenia, feeling guilty for making Rude angry, speaks to her father, who exists in spirit form. She confesses that she wants to be friends with Rude, but doesn't know how to make things right. Her father reassures her, telling her not to worry. He explains that friends sometimes fight, but it's through those fights that they get closer. He encourages her to apologize to Rude the next day. Lenia, determined to make amends, agrees. Her father, Peldrua, the king of spirits, also expresses a desire to speak with Rude, though his motives remain unclear. Meanwhile, Rude continues to walk away, regretting his actions. He realizes that perhaps he was too harsh on Lenia. She doesn't fully grasp the weight of the battle between dragons and humans, because she's lived her life isolated in a snowy mountain, surrounded only by spirits. It dawns on him that he may have been unfair, especially when he compares himself to Asura, who is much kinder and more patient, able to handle Lenia's eccentricities with ease. Rude wonders if he has failed to understand Lenia as well as Asura has. As Rude reflects, he unexpectedly runs into Balak and Henneth, who are still seething over the incident involving Ryan. Henneth, visibly angry, continues to press Ryan to leave. Henneth claims that Ryan is wandering around in front of the dorms, clearly wanting to get revenge for being punished for hitting Rude. However, Ryan tries to explain that there was a misunderstanding, and that she already made up with Rude. She wants to bring him breakfast and check if he is okay since he was hurt. Ryan quickly stops speaking when Henneth flares up and asks Rude if he indeed got hurt. Rude explains that it's nothing. Ryan brought him to her place and she sparred with someone, which caused him to get a little injured. Henneth declares that she is going to report everything to the professor, realizing that they broke the rules by leaving the capital. Rude immediately asks Balak to hold Henneth. Eventually, Henneth calms down and tells Ryan that they should all be friends. She says that she also wants to learn close-range martial arts and Snickers, suggesting that both she and Balak will just have to sacrifice their wrists and a couple of ribs. Ryan realizes that Henneth is still angry and decides to walk away. Meanwhile, Rude asks Henneth why she is treating Ryan this way, to which Henneth storms off. Balak also leaves, mentioning that he has to do community service before morning classes, which he feels is ruining the school atmosphere, although he doesn't understand why. After the morning class ends, Lenia comes to see Rude and asks if he is hungry. They are later seen on the roof, where she made barbecue and asks which type he likes. He unconsciously replies that he likes it medium rare. Then, he asks why they are having lunch on the roof. She explains that they can't have it in the class, or else there would be smoke everywhere. She also apologizes for what she said the previous day, acknowledging that it must have enraged him, as he is well aware of how dangerous dragons are to humans. They make up and become friends, and Rude seizes the opportunity to compliment Lenia in any way he can think of. He encourages her to do her best and get good grades so everyone will look up to her, allowing her to have as many friends as she wants. Lenia agrees, but with one condition. Her father wants to talk to him. Just then, her father appears in the form of a spirit, asking Lenia to give them some space, to which she agrees and leaves. Rude then bows in greeting to Peldrua, the king of the ice spirits, and introduces himself. Peldrua asks directly if Rude has returned to the past. Rude is shocked by how Peldrua knows about him and responds that he knows the time in this world was reset once, and that Rude's scent is familiar. Peldrua further explains that the spirit world and the current world exist in completely different dimensions. However, spirits and spiritualists can forge connections, creating pathways between the two worlds. As a result, spirits that have left their original bodies along these paths are still influenced by the human world, which gives them a sense of déjà vu. This is how Peldrua was able to sense the reversal of time, though he doesn't know what happened before the reset. He then asks if Rude and Lenia must have known each other before the time reversal, to which Rude responds that it was someone else, and that he was just a nobody who followed that person. Rude proceeds to tell Peldrua what happened before the time was reversed. Peldrua learns that Aesir disappeared along with the dimension dragon, Satyrin. However, Peldrua points out that Satyrin might still be alive. He explains that Satyrin is an extremely cautious being who never takes risks, and must have felt cornered, running away to recover his strength. He also believes that Rude's brother must have been caught in the backlash, but won't die so easily. He is likely lost in another dimension somewhere with Satyrin. Rude feels a sense of hope upon hearing this. Peldrua then asks if Rude has tried to look for Aesir in Satyrin's nest, the Island of Treasures. Rude explains that he needs to prepare for the coming tragedies first, and then asks Peldrua if he knows anything about the dragon who caused the time reversal. Peldrua acknowledges that he knows who the dragon is, but reveals that he cannot say anything, as he took an oath on his life about it. Peldrua asks Rude about his daughter, curious about how she died before the time reversal. Rude explains that it was the Ice Jade Dragon, Nephren, that they couldn't find a single way to defeat. Just when Nephren was about to kill everyone, Lenia made a choice. She sealed herself in an enormous glacier with the Ice Dragon, and smiled until the very end. Peldrua, however, knows that Rude is the only one who can change the fate of the world. He believes his daughter's life is in Rude's hands. Rude promises to do his best. Determined to help change his daughter's future, Peldrua takes action. He gives some of his powers to Rude, who experiences intense pain. Peldrua urges him to accept it, explaining that the power of a spirit will be helpful, and that he also wants to protect his daughter. However, Rude is upset, claiming that he didn't have any talent for spiritualism in the past, and that they didn't even agree to a contract before Peldrua forced his way into his heart. Peldrua reassures him, adding that he hopes Rude won't disappoint him. He tells him that no matter where he is, he will be able to use the powers and hear his thoughts, and that controlling minor spirits will become second nature to him. Not long after, Lenia returns, worried that they've been talking for too long. She sniffs Rude and remarks that he smells like her dad. Rude quickly comes up with an excuse, saying that her father is easier to get along with than expected, and that he has agreed that Rude can speak casually with him. Peldrua is shocked but plays along, knowing that Rude is getting a little revenge for what he did earlier. A few weeks later, after that incident, Rude receives the Twilight Guild's investigation results on his brother. Abel White, the leader of the Twilight Moon Guild, is the one who scouted Rude in the school cafeteria. He carried out the investigation on Rude's brother, Aesir, and came to the same conclusion. There was no trace of Aesir. The Twilight Moon Guild is renowned for its intelligence gathering, so if they couldn't find Aesir, it means he likely never existed in this world after time was reversed. This implies that Aesir is trapped in another dimension. Peldrua then asks Rude what he plans to do. Rude responds that he will search for Aesir's traces in the heavenly domain, but this is only possible if he earns the same number of wings as his brother. His second option is to look for Aesir on the Island of Treasures, where Satyrin resides, but that won't be easy. He would need to get past the guards protecting the path to the island. Both options are difficult, and he also needs the required strength to find a way to open the cracks between dimensions. Peldrua informs him that he doesn't recall any human magician capable of doing that. Rude then heads to the library, where Lenia immediately comes to meet him. She tells him that she came to study, just like she promised. Meanwhile, Henneth is upset by Rude's tardiness. As Rude gets a message from Professor Daniil asking him to come to his office, he asks Balak to keep an eye on Henneth and Lenia, who are bickering intensely. Balak is unsure how to handle the situation, as the argument between the two is getting out of hand. Rude quickly leaves to meet the professor. At Professor Danil's office, Rude is introduced to Danil's teacher, Ein Bryce. Ein Bryce greets his grand disciple warmly, and Rude introduces himself. Though Ein Bryce appears young, he is actually over 100 years old. His body stopped aging when his mana training reached a certain peak, and he achieved around 6 wings of the heavenly spearmanship at a young age, which is why his aging process halted. Bryce is incredibly talented and is also the person who defeated the ever-changing dragon, Kianil. Bryce, after remarking that Rude isn't half bad but a bit lacking in common sense for not bringing a gift or cake when visiting a teacher like him, smiles as Professor Danil offers to go get some refreshments for Ein. He instructs Rude to enjoy his time with his teacher while he steps out briefly. After a short moment of silence, Bryce's expression shifts, and he asks Rude if he knows the reason he came to visit the academy. Rude, not quite taking the situation seriously, jokingly asks if Bryce is a tourist based on the bags he's carrying, causing Bryce to get upset. He scolds Rude for having an attitude problem, but then his tone changes to a more serious one. Bryce lowers his voice, making it clear that what he's about to tell Rude must never be shared with Professor Danil. With an air of mystery, he reveals that Professor Damien has a connection to the ever-changing dragon, Kianil. Bryce reveals to Rude that the heart of the ever-changing dragon, Kianil, is beating in Professor Damien's chest. This shocking truth leaves Rude stunned, as he learns that no one knows how a human could survive with a dragon's heart inside them. Usually such a feat would require either transplanting a small part of the heart or the use of powerful magic. However, the heart is gradually encroaching on Damien's soul. If it consumes him entirely, it could trigger a second ever-changing incident, much worse than the first. In the previous timeline, Jeremy had convinced Damien to kill himself before that could happen, a decision everyone believed to be the right one at the time. However, Jeremy kept the heart after Damien's death, unaware of the dangerous consequences of keeping it. Shortly after, Iradium was ambushed by the lightning dragon, drawn there by the ever-changing dragon's heart. In that battle, hundreds of dragon slayers were killed, including both Professor Danil and Bryce. Rude, confused and troubled, asks Bryce how he knows all of this. Bryce explains that he's been monitoring Damien closely because of the dragon's heart inside him. He emphasizes that Professor Danil cannot know about this connection, as Danil has attachment issues and might react poorly to the information. Rude presses further, asking why Bryce is sharing this with him. Bryce responds that Rude, being from Daysol and a victim of the ever-changing incident, has the right to know the truth. He then asks Rude about Damien's behavior recently. Rude describes Damien as reserved but not a bad person, and Bryce instructs him to report any signs of aggression or personality changes in Damien immediately. Realizing that Jeremy is likely the one who informed Bryce about Damien, Rude warns Bryce that Jeremy is not trustworthy. He's the type of person willing to sacrifice anything to achieve his goals. Bryce asks Rude if he has any solution other than killing Damien to prevent another tragedy, to which Rude replies that he will figure something out in the meantime. Just then, Professor Danil returns, and Bryce quickly takes the items Danil bought for him and leaves, telling Rude he will watch what he can do while Danil is left confused by his teacher's cryptic words. When Rude gets back to the library, he doesn't see his friends there, wondering where they went. He sees Balak's note on the table informing him that he couldn't calm the two ladies, so they were sent out of the library. The two ladies are about to hold a duel on the roof, which worries Rude. Ryan comes over asking what's wrong. He tells her to leave him alone, as he's trying to prepare for his exams. She teases him, asking if he's deciding to ignore her because his friend hates him. He tells her that it's not like that, and asks if she's still mad because of Henneth. She says no. Then she leans over, asking what he's reading, which turns out to be a report on the ever-changing incident regarding the 7 dragons. Ryan asks him if he's not having the weird thought of trying to get revenge on the dragons by going to the southern region. He replies that the region is crawling with dragons, so if he goes there, he would be serving himself on a silver platter. She's relieved. After all, she had heard him claim that he would kill all the dragons. Rude tells her he's serious about that. He's going to gather as much power as he can, and after that, he'll kill the 7 dragons one by one and exterminate their kind altogether to regain what he's lost. Rian then says that all the stuff about the 7 dragons is just legend and that they might not even exist. She suggests that the one that appeared during the ever-changing incident might have been called a dragon simply because it resembled one from the records. However, Rude tells her that it's all true, that those dragons exist. The one he saw 10 years ago was nothing short of a world-ending calamity, and since he experienced it once, he doesn't want to go through it again, which is why he wants to eliminate the dragons. Ryan apologizes and asks if he's not scared. He replies no, asking her rhetorically if he should be. She says she's only scared that the people around her will get hurt or die. He stands up, saying that he's going to have something to eat. Ryan asks him to wait and tells him that she'll help him by lending him her strength to fulfill his goal. She says she'll do what she can, whether it's strategizing a plan to slay the 7 dragons or establishing a guild. Rude is surprised and asks why she's going to such lengths to help him. She simply replies that she just wants to. He remarks that people might think she likes him if she doesn't have a reason. She glares at him and runs away, blushing. Later, She berates herself for making things even more awkward by running away, trying to convince herself that there's no way she would like a guy like Rude. However, Professor Mason sees her and drags her to the training room, obviously looking forward to beating her again, using the excuse that he wants to see how much she has progressed. They are both seen exchanging moves, with Professor Mason getting impressed by Ryan's growth and fighting prowess, especially the new footwork she's using. She even manages to land a counterattack on him. But Professor Mason seizes the opportunity when he notices Ryan let her guard down and delivers a hit on her. Ryan falls down, feeling the hurt of the attack. Professor Mason then remarks that she is improving. Ryan retorts that it's all due to someone else's help, to which Professor Mason, already aware, nods and says, "Rude." He remarks that they both seem close, causing Ryan to blush and immediately run away. Later in the evening, Rude is seen outside the dorms. Peldrua talks about the likelihood that Ryan might be interested in Rude, suggesting that it could be a good thing. He tells Rude that he needs to understand that the Ryan he knew in the past is completely different from who she is now. The next day, students are seen talking around the school premises about the test they have. Rude is sitting by the side, reading a book, but his mind is elsewhere, focusing on Ryan, who has been openly avoiding him. Peldrua teasingly suggests that maybe Ryan is too embarrassed to look at him since he drove a wedge between them with his tactless words. Meanwhile, Rude is feeling confused. After all, Ryan was the person he had been envious of his entire life, his unwitting role model. All he ever wanted was to be able to beat her in a fair duel, but now it seems she's interested in him. True to his thoughts, Ryan eventually comes over, handing him a present to wish him luck on his exams before quickly running away again. Rude feels conflicted, thinking that he doesn't need this. Later in the school cafeteria after the test, Henneth is heard claiming that she finished the test 5 minutes before Rude. Rude calmly tells her that they had an hour to finish the test, so there's no real meaning in finishing faster. Meanwhile, Balak boasts that he finished his test in 1 minute. Henneth retorts that he must have written a letter to the teacher to let him pass the test. Lenia is seen approaching, and soon enough, she and Henneth begin going at each other as usual. Rude, fed up with the constant bickering, asks Peldrua to try calming the ladies down. Peldrua teasingly replies that they'll get closer after the fight, but Rude doesn't see it that way, recalling that they've always been fighting in the past without any sign of improving their relationship. Balak then asks Rude if he's prepared for tomorrow's performance test. Rude responds that they don't prepare for it, as the test will be random, meant to simulate actual combat. Balak claims that they might get sent to a desert and they'll need plenty of water. Rude asks how he plans on carrying all that water, to which Balak replies that the water would be in his stomach. Rude can only remain silent for a minute, lamenting the lost intelligence of Balak. Meanwhile, the ladies are still going at each other, completely ignoring the conversation. The next day, before the commencement of the test, Professor Arthur informs the first years that the test will take place on the Iradium-exclusive testing grounds, located on the outskirts of the Althea Empire. The grounds span various parts of the continent, and the students will face different kinds of monsters, depending on the climate and environment. However, it won't only be monsters they'll face. Once they're transported to their assigned regions via the warp gate, they must overcome the monster's interference to track, find, and kill dragons, which is the final objective of the performance test. Professor Arthur adds that normal swordsmanship won't be enough to scratch the dragon's tough hides, and their intelligence is far greater than that of normal monsters. Furthermore, dragons have an innate resistance to magic. He explains that those who perform exceptionally well in each field will be given the chance to take an additional test. The final test will be a tournament match, and the winner will gain the right to carry a personal weapon from the Iradium Vault. With that, the warp gate is activated, signaling the start of the test. As Rude heads toward the warp gate, he recalls his past life, where he was completely beaten by Ryan during the final tournament. He plans on changing that outcome this time around. Once the gate activates, he is transported into an unknown forest. The environment is dense and mysterious, and he's unsure of where exactly he is. Peldrua, sensing the area, notifies Rude that he detects some monsters in the vicinity. However, Rude's goal isn't to deal with those monsters. His objective is far bigger. Suddenly, a huge ogre attacks Rude from behind, its massive form charging at him with brute force. Without hesitation, Rude swiftly cuts the ogre's Achilles tendon, sending it tumbling to the ground. Blood pours from the wound as Rude finishes off the monster, creating a bloody massacre. The stench of blood fills the air, a scent that no dragon, especially a horned snake dragon, could ever ignore. Moments later, Rude hears the sound of an enormous creature approaching, its footsteps causing the ground to shake violently. The vibrations send excitement coursing through Rude's body. He knows what's coming, the dragon. Rude judges from the ground-shaking footsteps that the dragon approaching them is a huge one. Before he can prepare for the impending battle, Willem suddenly bursts into view, looking terrified and frantically trying to escape. He rushes toward Rude, shouting that they need to run away, But before he can finish his warning, the dragon is already upon them. Willem, paralyzed with fear, collapses onto his butt, too scared to move. The dragon is a massive, terrifying sight. Its scales glisten as it rears up, ready to strike. Rude instinctively raises his sword to block the incoming attack, but as soon as the dragon's power connects, he can feel how immense its strength is. His sword groans under the pressure, and he knows it won't last long if he stays locked in a direct clash. Thinking quickly, he uses the force of the dragon's strike to propel himself into the air, narrowly avoiding the creature's deadly blow. Mid-air, Rude activates the heavenly spearmanship, and his back sprout 3 wings, a power he's only just acquired. While he's still unable to use air slashes, the sheer strength of the 3 wings is enough to give him the edge. With focus and precision, he dives down toward the dragon, using the technique from the heavenly spearmanship. He drives his spear-like sword into the dragon's head with immense force. Willem, still on the ground and in disbelief, watches as Rude calmly deals with the dragon's ferocity. His shock grows even further when he shouts at Rude to give up, warning him that unless he uses the air slashes, his sword won't stand a chance against the dragon's tough scales. Rude, undeterred, simply tells Willem to sit and watch. Rude is fully aware that the dragon's scales are nearly invulnerable, but he knows every creature has its weak points. As the dragon rages on, he begins to target the vulnerable areas between its scales, its eyes, breathing holes, and joints. Each hit lands with precision, though the dragon's durability makes it a tough battle. As he prepares for the final blow, Rude's sword unexpectedly snaps. It's a training sword, so it's not surprising, but it leaves him without a weapon. He looks over to Willem, who is still shaken but trying to help, and asks if he has a spare sword. Willem sheepishly responds that his own sword is also broken. With no other option, Rude decides to take down the dragon with his bare hands, much to Willem's shock. Willem, still processing what he's seen, thanks Rude for saving him. He then apologizes for his previous behavior, expressing a newfound respect for Rude's strength. Willem admits he had been confident in his own abilities, believing himself to be the strongest in his hometown. But after witnessing Rude in action, he realizes just how much stronger Rude is. Willem acknowledges how weak he is in comparison, but vows not to give up. He declares that he will use Rude as his new standard and push himself to grow stronger, determined to match Rude's level of strength. Rude feels a bit embarrassed at Willem's words, recognizing that Willem is expressing admiration for him in the same way he once admired others in the past. The humility in Willem's resolve strikes a chord with him, and he realizes how far he has come in his own journey. Just then, a teacher arrives, notifying them that their performance test is over and they can now head back to the meeting point. As they make their way back, Rude and Willem are unaware that someone is observing them from a distance. A familiar figure is watching their progress with a keen eye. It turns out to be the familiar of Iradium's director, Gerard de Graham. He remarks that Rude is indeed a fine fighter, just as the rumors have said. Professor Daniel asks the director about Rude's performance, and the director acknowledges that Rude is truly beyond his expectations. Initially, he thought Rude would struggle with an adolescent Terra Dragon, but Rude defeats it with ease. Professor Daniel adds that Rude's talents are unprecedented, finding it hard to believe he is only 17. He confidently states that Rude would make an excellent dragon slayer. However, the director points out that Rude will have to surpass even that to become a hero, like the legendary hero of freedom. He refers to the Chronicles of Varnar, a story from a time long past when humans were merely prey for dragonkind. Terra dragons roamed the land, Welkin dragons dominated the skies, and colossal dragons loomed as large as mountains. Above all of them were the Dragonkin, who reigned supreme. Though they resembled humans outwardly, the Dragonkin were intelligent and immensely powerful. They not only massacred humans, but also enslaved them for entertainment. 700 years ago, in the very amphitheater of the school, the Dragonkin forced humans to fight as gladiators for their amusement. Among them was Varnar, a gladiator stronger than the rest. He united his fellow captives and sparked a revolution. Under Varnar's leadership, the gladiators became the first dragon slayers, pushing the Dragonkin beyond the great northern mountain range. After a prolonged battle, they sealed away the 7 dragons who ruled dragonkind, marking the beginning of an era of freedom for humanity. Professor Daniel questions the story, asking why Varnar chose to seal the dragons instead of exterminating them. He reasons that if Varnar had eradicated them, there would be no need for dragon slayers now. The director advises him not to dwell on the past, emphasizing that regardless of what happened, they must focus on ensuring people continue to live as humans should. An announcement interrupts their discussion, declaring that all groups have completed the performance test. Students are instructed to hand in their weapons and gather at the designated location. It is also announced that an additional test will take place in 3 days, with the brackets and locations posted on the main hall notice board. Fast forward to the day of the additional test. The students are gathered. Among them, Rude, Henneth, and Balak prepare together, all having qualified for this stage. However, Balak learns he is matched against Ryan. Henneth teases him, urging him to at least put up a strong fight. Balak turns to Rude, asking if Ryan is really that formidable. Rude nods, explaining that Ryan is likely the strongest among the first years, though he adds confidently, but he is stronger this time around. As the duel approaches, Ryan and Balak step into the arena. The battle begins with Ryan launching a flurry of swift sword strikes. Balak blocks them using only his powerful muscles, shrugging off the blows as he shifts into his battle stance, ready to counterattack. Balak dashes at her using some unique footwork, launching a punch at her, but she blocks it with her sword. Ryan mentally assesses Balak's prowess and notices what she thinks is an opening. She decides to aim for it and swings her sword, but it turns out not to be an opening as Balak has no intention of dodging. Instead, he launches his attack, which Ryan quickly dodges before landing a punch on him. Balak feels the impact and jumps back to create some distance. Ryan picks up her sword and asks if he has achieved harmony between his mana and muscles, noting that he seems pretty tough. However, Balak feels her punch resonate through his bones, even though she isn't using any martial style, and wonders if her physical abilities exceed his own. Despite this, he becomes more riled up. His muscles bulge, ripping his shirt apart as he dashes at her again. To his surprise, she flings him over with ease and remarks that he must be an exhibitionist. She sends a punch at insane speed, which he quickly dodges, but it turns out to be a feint. He gets kicked and is sent flying to the ground, staggering as he tries to stand. Refusing to go down without a fight, he claims he will draw out the full strength of his body to stand against her. As he attempts to bulk up his lower body muscles, almost ripping his pants, the Invigilator immediately steps in and disqualifies him. He is taken away and Ryan wins the match. She glances at Rude before leaving. Meanwhile, Henneth, standing beside Rude, notices that he has been staring intently at Ryan. Wondering what's going on, she snaps him out of his thoughts and reminds him that it's almost their turn. She warns him not to dare go easy on her. In the past, Henneth is known as the Flame Witch. A late bloomer, she eventually becomes the greatest pyromancer of all time. At her peak, no one can best her in a battle of wits, as she earns a name for herself through sophisticated techniques and sharp judgment. Back in the present, it doesn't take long before Henneth is defeated by Rude. However, she displays a unique attitude, an undying spirit that refuses to give in. Despite her determination, Rude wins the match. He tells her that her last attack was close, the timing was good, but her lunge still needs more practice. Henneth retorts that he's just full of himself and suggests he should help her by teaching her some techniques with the dagger, especially since he's already teaching Ryan close-range martial arts. Rude immediately brushes her off, claiming he has somewhere else to be, and leaves. Henneth shouts after him, reminding him that the final match will begin soon, but Rude is already gone. The final match is between Rude and Ryan, but Ryan is seen running away, claiming that she doesn't want to fight him. She recalls how Rude had always avoided sparring with her in the past, coming up with endless excuses to avoid a match. Now, though, she is stunned by the intense look in his eyes. The fighting spirit she sees in him is something she has never experienced before. As Rude looks at her, she feels all his competitiveness and open hostility directed toward her, leaving her confused. She wonders why he seems so determined to fight her this time when he always avoided it before. Before long, Rude catches up to her. He tells her the final match will begin in 30 minutes and demands that she go back to the waiting room. Ryan, still hesitant, insists that she doesn't want to fight him. She tells him she doesn't care about the prize and that she's just going to forfeit the match. Hearing this, Rude becomes furious. His voice rises as he asks if she's pitying him, thinking he isn't worth her time. He accuses her of looking down on him, and his anger grows stronger. Ryan tries to explain what she meant, but Rude cuts her off. He doesn't let her speak, telling her she has no right to avoid the fight. He warns her not to dare run away this time. It turns out that Rude's anger and determination to fight Ryan stem from something much deeper. In the past, he had always been chasing after her. He hated her, just as she seemed to despise him. But their fates became intertwined during a deadly battle against the dragon of martial fists, Raypaya. During that battle, Ryan sacrificed herself to save Rude. Even though Rude knows that the Ryan Krail he once knew is dead, he can't help but hang on to the past. Deep down, he is aware that his feelings are driven by his inferiority complex, but that doesn't stop him. He still clings to what happened between them, unable to let go. When he tries to approach Ryan, she slaps his hand away. Her voice is firm as she tells him not to follow her. Without another word, she turns and leaves, leaving Rude standing there, his emotions a mix of anger, confusion, and longing. Back in the past, Ryan was lonely and detached from everyone around her. She carried the heavy burden of revenge, spending her days hunting dragons and shutting out the world. To her, Rude was just another person in the background, not even worth noticing. But for Rude, Ryan was everything. She was the standard of genius he had always wanted to surpass. Her skill, her strength, and her sheer determination were things he envied the most. Rude's envy burned deep inside him, driving him to push himself harder every day. He wanted to stand on equal ground with her, to prove he could be better. But no matter how hard he tried, she always seemed far ahead. That envy is the reason he can't let go of her memory, even now. When the time for the final match arrives, Rude steps into the arena, ready to face her. But to everyone's surprise, Ryan doesn't show up. The announcer declares Rude the winner by forfeit, leaving the audience in shock. Whispers fill the air as people wonder what could have happened to Ryan. Rude doesn't celebrate his victory. Instead, his frustration grows. He has no intention of letting her run away or avoiding the confrontation between them. Ryan sits in her usual quiet spot, lost in thought. She wonders if Rude is still angry with her. She knows the additional test must be over by now, but she's unsure what Rude might be thinking. Just as she starts to feel uneasy, she's startled by Rude's sudden appearance. Her eyes widen in surprise as she asks how he found her. Rude smirks faintly, explaining that he already knew about this spot. In his previous life, Ryan would always come here whenever she was upset. And back then, he would come here to challenge her to a fight. It was one of the few ways he could interact with her, even though she rarely paid him any attention. Without saying much else, Rude throws a sword toward her. It lands just in front of her feet. His voice is firm and unyielding as he commands her to stand up. He declares that they're going to have the final fight now, and he won't take no for an answer. Without waiting for her response, Rude charges at her with his sword, launching an attack. Ryan, taken aback, picks up the sword to block his strike. She tries to reason with him, telling him she doesn't want to fight. But as their blades clash, she can feel the weight of his sword chi pressing down on her. The sheer force of it shakes her stance, and for the first time, she wonders if this overwhelming energy is why he seems so confident in challenging her. Rude follows up with another swift attack, but this time Ryan erects a mana shield to block it. To her shock, his next strike shatters the shield, forcing her to jump back quickly to dodge the blow. As she steadies herself, she channels her mana to unleash an air slash in his direction. Rude pauses for a brief moment, his eyes lighting up with recognition. Seeing her use an air slash only confirms how incredibly talented she is. Despite her skill, Ryan tells him to stop. She insists there's no point in continuing, as he can't possibly win against her when she can wield such techniques. But Rude refuses to back down. His determination burns brighter as he launches another sword strike. Ryan raises her blade to block it, only to realize too late that it was a feint. The real strike lands squarely on her, catching her off guard. Before she can recover, Rude closes the gap between them and begins unleashing a flurry of punches. Desperate to create some distance, Ryan sends out a series of air slashes, hoping to force him back. But Rude skillfully weaves through each one, moving closer with precision and agility. In a final burst of speed, he closes the distance completely and delivers a solid punch directly to her face. She then tries to attack again with her sword slashes, but Rude doesn't allow her as he keeps using his fists. Ryan feels that he has a crazy reaction time, as he seems to be completely reading her movements. Meanwhile, Rude is well aware of the fact that Ryan is even stronger than she was in his previous life, and he knows he won't stand a chance unless he uses Hooper Sense. However, even though he manages to overwhelm her, he doesn't feel content. He jumps back and pulls out his sword, to which Ryan retaliates with her air slashes, confident that he can't use it yet. After delivering her attack, Ryan feels confident that she has won. However, to her surprise, she sees Rude pulling off the same move. It turns out that he has gained the power of the fourth wing, which allows him to use an air slash. His air slash is on an entirely different level compared to hers, and with it, he wins the duel. Even though he has won against someone he has always looked up to, Rude doesn't feel any satisfaction. His victory brings him no joy. Ryan, noticing his lack of emotion, sarcastically asks if he is happy now, but he feels empty inside, as if the victory has no real meaning. Seeing his reaction, Ryan's anger flares. She can't believe that Rude has forced her to fight against her will, and yet he claims to feel empty. In her frustration, she punches him in the face, demanding to know why he fought her in the first place. Rude explains that he had to win against her at least once, but Ryan points out something he has never addressed. She realizes that he hasn't truly wanted to win against her, but rather against someone he has always been haunted by since their first meeting. Ryan is furious, feeling like she is nothing more than a substitute for someone else in his eyes. Rude tries to explain that she is wrong. He admits that she is someone he has always admired, someone at a level he can never hope to reach. No matter what he does, he can never keep up with her. But the real reason for his frustration is that he can't accept the fact that she, of all people, has sacrificed herself for him. This revelation confuses Ryan, as she doesn't understand what he means. After all, they have only met in school, so she can't fathom what he is talking about. Peldrua, who has been watching, tries to warn Rude not to reveal his past, but Rude ignores him. He goes on to explain that in his previous life, Ryan died saving him, revealing that he is speaking of events from his past life. Ryan becomes confused and asks what he is talking about. Rude then reveals that he went back in time to an earlier point in his life, and that she must have noticed it too. He explains that his mana level is too complete to be explained simply by talent in martial arts, and his skill and deftness would be impossible without prior experience. He adds that he can even copy the talents of people he has just met, which wouldn't be possible unless he had already experienced those abilities. Ryan is stunned by what he just revealed, but as she processes his words, she realizes that this perfectly explains the dissonance she's been feeling and all the questions she's had, including the fact that Rude already knows her, an adult version of her that she isn't even aware of. Rude acknowledges this and explains how he became obsessed with trying to beat her, mainly because of how she always treated him like garbage. He tells her that she went off and got herself killed after saving him, which surprises her even more. Ryan is dumbfounded by the fact that the person Rude hated, longed for, and looked up to was actually her. She suddenly understands why he was trying so hard to fight her, even though she's stronger than she was in the past. She asks him why he apologized back then when she was crying, and why, if he really hated her, he didn't just pass by without saying anything. After all, he even taught her close-range martial arts and showed her around the capital. Rude replies that in the previous life, she looked down on him, and he had been trying to challenge her. He admits that they were nothing more than strangers back then, and he needed to prove something to himself by confronting her. However, Rian explains that this might be his second chance, that he has done things differently this time. She points out that, in this life, he even gave her his handkerchief when she was crying in the stairwell. She reaches out and touches his face, but Rude slaps her hand away in response. Ryan then says she apologizes on behalf of her past self, admitting that she treated him like garbage back then. However, Rude doesn't want her to apologize to him. He becomes angry, insisting that he doesn't want to feel more miserable than he did in his previous life. Ryan, feeling frustrated, grabs him by the collar and headbutts him, telling him to shut up. She insists that it's not easy for her to accept the situation. After all, he should have been the one to apologize, but instead, it's all because he couldn't let go of his stupid grudge, even after going back in time. She continues, explaining that everything he felt in his previous life has nothing to do with the her right now. She is just doing him a favor by apologizing first, even though she's not the person he knew back then. She tells him that her emotions right now are real, and that she is not the same person from the past. After saying this, Rian leans in and gives him a kiss, then confesses that she likes him as he is right now. Rude wakes up with a start the next morning, his mind racing as he recalls everything that happened the previous night. He hopes that it was all just a dream, but Peldrua quickly informs him that it was no dream. Peldrua scolds him, saying that he should be ashamed of himself for revealing everything to Ryan, who is now terribly embarrassed by the whole situation. He goes on to say that Rude's behavior was even more embarrassing, especially since he ran away after Ryan confessed her feelings to him. Rude yells at Peldrua to stop talking, trying to convince himself that he will pretend nothing happened. He claims that Rian was the one who acted strangely, kissing someone who had forced her to fight and rambled on about his previous life. He tries to brush it all off, but Peldrua reminds him that today is the day he is supposed to receive the reward for completing the additional test. Rude quickly rushes out, frustrated that Peldrua hadn't told him this sooner. Later, Rude is seen with the director as they head toward the school's vault. The vault holds the legacy of past dragon slayers, along with priceless artifacts and weapons. Even if a student wins the tournament, they still need a majority vote from the professors and the director to gain access to the vault. It has been a long time since anyone has been allowed in, but now, thanks to Rude, that chance has finally arrived. As they walk, Rude recalls the time when his big brother and Rion were the ones chosen to receive weapons from the vault. This time, however, no one else seems worthy enough to take his brother's place except for him. Soon, Rude and the director arrive at a very antique building known as Iradium's Vault. The director activates the door, explaining to Rude that no matter what he chooses, the vault contains not only the history of Iradium, but also the legacy of the Dragon Slayers. It is a great honor and source of pride to set foot in this sacred place. As the door opens with a blinding white light, Rude enters, feeling the flow of mana change. Peldrua explains that it's because the vault exists in a separate realm, much like the Island of Treasures of the Dimension Dragon. There are no fixed coordinates for this place, making it an even more mystical and elusive location. Once inside, Rude sees that the vault is filled with items of the highest quality. Peldrua asks him what he is looking for, and Rude heads toward a particular item, the blasphemous blade, Demios. Peldrua immediately recognizes it as a relic of Varnar, the sword used by the first Dragon Slayer. Demios is a pitch-black blade known for its ability to sever the flow of mana and even fend off the greatest of magical attacks. Peldrua then asks if Rude has chosen the sword to follow in the footsteps of the hero Varnar. Rude responds firmly that this is not the case. He explains that if Varnar truly wanted to save the world, he would have exterminated all the dragons instead of sealing them away. Rude chose the sword because it was the same one his brother used in his previous life. Plus, its ability to protect against the strongest of the dragon kind is vital to him. As he prepares to leave, Rude stumbles upon a blue and yellow crystal lying on the floor. He picks it up and realizes that it is not a weapon, nor is it imbued with protective magic. As Rude continues to examine the stone, a terrible realization strikes him. The memory of a conversation from his previous life comes flooding back. A conversation he had with his brother, Asir, about Professor Damien's death. They had seen a similar blue and yellow stone in the sky, which was about to crack open, and then a lightning dragon, Harma, had appeared, causing mayhem in the school. The stone in his hand is not just any crystal. It is the seal stone of the lightning dragon, Harma. A sense of dread fills him as he recalls the destruction that Harma brought in the past. Back then, Rude had neither the will nor the skills to withstand the existence of the 7 dragons. As the years passed, he couldn't forget the terrible screams or the chaos that ensued. The memories of destruction, pain, and the aftermath of the dragon attacks haunted him, and even now, the weight of those memories lingered in his mind. Now, standing before the seal stone of the lightning dragon, Rude realizes that it doesn't belong in the vault. Unlike the other items in the vault, it isn't imbued with any protective magic or special enchantments. It is an anomaly. His mind races as he comes to a horrifying realization. The lightning dragon didn't come to attack Iradium. It had been here all along, lying dormant. Rude turns to Peldrua, asking if he can determine when the lightning dragon will awaken. Peldrua responds gravely, revealing that since the seal is in poor condition, it won't last more than another 2 years. This information sends a chill down Rude's spine. In his previous life, he had calculated the timeline, and based on those calculations, the lightning dragon would likely awaken in about 6 months from now, which aligns with the events that had transpired before. It had been only a few months after this point that Professor Damien had died, which meant something had triggered the awakening of the lightning dragon. Rude then remembers Jeremy's involvement and the heart of the ever-changing dragon he had pocketed. This heart had likely sped up the lightning dragon's emergence, causing the disaster to unfold much sooner than anticipated. Rude's grip tightens around the seal stone. He cannot afford to leave it in the vault, knowing the danger it poses. With the situation growing more urgent, Rude makes the decision to keep the seal stone. He cannot take any chances by leaving it behind. His plans must move faster than originally intended. There is no time to waste. Peldrua then asks Rude a pointed question. If he plans on exterminating all dragons in the world, what will he do if he encounters a good dragon? Rude's response is chillingly resolute. Even if a good dragon exists, it would already be dead by now. The implication is that no dragon, no matter its nature, can be trusted or spared. Rude's determination to eliminate every dragon remains unwavering. At this moment, Rude knows he cannot afford to tamper with the seal stone any further. The best course of action is to prepare for the inevitable incident. His thoughts are occupied with the situation, but he's also been frequenting meetings with Professor Damien, who has become more comfortable around him, even if he still doesn't talk much. During one of their classes, Damien casually mentions that Rude's skills with the dagger have surpassed what he can teach him. He wonders why Rude insists on continuing their lessons despite already mastering the basics. However, Damien acknowledges that Rude seems to enjoy the tea they share during these sessions, and he offers to procure better quality beans next time. Rude, however, replies that he still wants to learn more about Damien's experiences, as he respects him deeply as a senior dragon slayer. Damien is visibly uncomfortable with the topic, a reaction that doesn't go unnoticed by Rude. He senses that something is off, and after a moment of thought, it clicks. Damien's discomfort likely stems from guilt. Specifically, guilt tied to the fact that Rude is from Desol, the land destroyed by the heart of the dragon that had once caused so much destruction. Rude decides to capitalize on the situation, asking about the incident that happened in Desol, which used to be his home. Damien begins to feel down as he listens to Rude talk about his family, all of whom are gone due to that incident, except for him and his brother. Damien feels even more guilty, and quickly stands up, telling Rude that their time is up, and that he'll listen to the rest some other time. As Rude leaves, he adds that he lost everything to the dragon, and is desperately struggling to get it all back. As soon as Rude leaves Damien's office, Damien takes a deep breath, feeling consumed by guilt as well. However, he knows that Damien won't be able to keep his mouth shut for long. If Damien doesn't reveal anything or turns out to be evil, he'll kill him himself. Still, he doubts that Damien is an evil person, considering how many burdens he's carrying. Meanwhile, Damien is seen in his office, seemingly muttering, "I'm sorry." Rude sits in his room, lost in thought, wondering how long it's going to take for Professor Damien to say something. It has been a while since he last heard from him, and he needs some kind of response before he can begin any preparations. He knows that with the current abilities he has, the most he can achieve is 4 wings, which would give him access to air slashes and the inventory. However, this is far from enough to stand a chance against the powerful lightning dragon he is preparing to face. Peldrua, who is nearby, asks Rude if the inventory is one of the abilities granted by Heavenly Spearmanship. Rude explains that Heavenly Domain is a separate space that the inheritors can use, allowing them to store and access items. He goes on to say that in his previous life, his brother had used the inventory to gain access to countless weapons, something Rude has always longed for. The ability to pull out any weapon he needed at any moment is something he dreams of acquiring, but it feels out of reach for now. Later, Rude enters the training grounds and notices Rion yelling at Balak. Balak keeps taking off his gym clothes, and Ryan is getting frustrated. She explains to Rude that she is trying to practice close combat, but Balak's actions are causing a stink and distracting everyone. Without hesitation, Rude decides to use spiritual magic to clean Balak, a move that surprises everyone present. Henneth, curious, asks when Rude learned how to do that, and Rude casually responds that he picked it up recently. His nonchalant attitude only adds to the surprise. Rude, now ready to start his own training, is about to focus on his practice, when Ryan reminds him that he hasn't properly answered her about something she mentioned earlier. Henneth, curious, asks what's going on, and Ryan nervously reveals that she confessed her feelings to Rude. Henneth is shocked by this revelation, unsure how to respond. Before anyone can say more, a sudden sound from outside interrupts them. The group rushes to check what's happening and discovers Willem being beaten by an upperclassman. Despite the brutal treatment, Willem doesn't back down. He even insists that the upperclassman apologize for insulting Rude. Willem struggles to stand up, determination in his eyes as he says that Rude is his rival and that no one has the right to insult him. However, before he can get far, the upperclassman strikes him again, knocking him back down. At that moment, Rude steps in, his voice firm as he commands the upperclassman to stop. He reminds the upperclassman that he is the one who has been insulted, mentioning how the upperclassman has been calling him an orphan. Fueled by anger, Rude retaliates with a powerful punch to the upperclassman's face, knocking him down and beating the sense out of him. Willem, witnessing this, feels an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Rude has saved him once again. As the dust settles, all the other upperclassmen are seen kneeling on the ground, clearly intimidated by Rude. They seem to recognize him as their senior, as he stands in front of them, scolding them for their behavior. One of the upperclassmen, still on the ground, speaks up, revealing that they had heard rumors about Rude. Despite being a first-year student, Rude has been gaining a lot of attention, and it's been said that he's extremely rude, especially towards someone named Jeremy. Meanwhile, Jeremy sits in his office watching the clock as the seconds tick by. He glances at the door, remarking that Rude is running late. It seems that Jeremy has been expecting him, though it's unclear why or what the meeting will entail. Rude storms into the student council office, his frustration palpable as he forces his way in to confront Jeremy, who has been waiting for him. Jeremy remarks that Rude is a little later than expected and gestures for him to take a seat. However, Rude kicks the chair away, his anger evident as he stands, looking all pissed off. With a cold tone, he directly asks Jeremy what he's scheming and why he had the upperclassmen attack him. Jeremy quickly clarifies that it was all a misunderstanding. He denies ever ordering the student to hurt Rude, but admits that it's true Rude had been rude to him. Jeremy then shifts the conversation, mentioning that he has learned Rude has been meeting with Professor Damien quite often lately. He warns Rude that Damien is dangerous, reminding him of the caution he had given before. Rude cuts him off, asking sharply if Jeremy is concerned because Damien has the heart of the ever-changing dragon. Jeremy is taken aback, shocked that Rude is aware of that fact. He quickly recalls that Rude must have learned about it from Ein Bryce, who had surely informed him. Jeremy speculates that Rude was probably reported to if anything went wrong with Damien, and he was correct in his assumption. Despite this, Rude's dislike for Jeremy's authoritative tone grows. He hates how Jeremy acts as if he knows everything. Driven by a surge of frustration, Rude moves closer to Jeremy, his voice firm and resolute. He declares that he won't let Damien die and will make sure of that, making it clear that his resolve is unshakable. Meanwhile, in his own office, Damien is making tea, lost in thought. As he brews the tea, his mind drifts to the troubling realization that he should inform Rude about something important, that he too has the heart of the ever-changing dragon. Damien knows he owes Rude an explanation about how he came to possess it and the implications it carries. A brief flashback then plays in Damien's mind. As a child, he is seen sitting in a study with his grandfather. Damien's earliest memories are vivid and filled with warmth. He remembers the comforting smell of freshly roasted coffee filling the air, and his grandfather's rough hands gently ruffling his hair. His parents, both dragon slayers, had passed away when he was very young, and it was his grandfather who stepped in to raise him with all the love and care he could give. Damien had always admired his parents and dreamed of becoming a dragon slayer himself when he grew up, following in their footsteps. However, as he got older, Damien's hopes for this path began to fade. He developed a severe sensitivity to mana, a condition that started when he was just a child. The pain was unbearable, so intense that it made even breathing a challenge. His body struggled to cope with the constant agony, and despite the best efforts of renowned doctors and powerful magicians, there was no cure in sight. His grandfather, deeply frustrated by the helplessness of the situation, was torn between his love for Damien and his inability to help. One fateful night, when the pain became unbearable, his grandfather made the ultimate decision. He entered the room with the heart of the ever-changing dragon, knowing that it was the only thing that could save Damien's life. With no other choice, he had to force Damien to swallow the heart, knowing that the consequences would be far-reaching. It was a painful, irreversible decision, but it was the only way to ensure Damien could continue to live. Back in the present, Damien is deeply aware of the gravity of what his grandfather did. He understands that his grandfather's actions were born out of love and desperation, but the weight of guilt still presses heavily on him. He knows that if Rude wants to resent him for what happened, he has every right to do so. But at the time, Damien had no idea how deeply the heart of the ever-changing dragon would affect him, or how it would shape his life in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Now, as he faces Rude, the guilt of carrying the dragon's heart within him overwhelms him. Damien feels the burden of his past actions, and in a moment of vulnerability, he reveals this truth to Rude. In the Alchemy Club room of Magic Research Building B, Henneth is found asleep at her desk, her head resting on an open alchemy book. The peaceful silence is broken when a female student enters and gently wakes her up. She asks Henneth if she had her usual training session with Lady Rihanna. Henneth stirs, groggily lifting her head, and replies that she couldn't focus on anything during the training and that Lady Rihanna had given her a break, ending the session early. She confesses that she's feeling stressed and tired. Her friend, clearly concerned, assumes it's because of the upcoming festival, but Henneth sighs and reveals that her worry isn't about the festival. Instead, she's been anxious because of Rude. She admits that she's afraid he won't hang out with her anymore now that he's dating someone. Her friend teases her, suggesting that Henneth must be interested in Rude too, a comment that flusters Henneth, causing her to turn away, embarrassed by the suggestion. It is at that moment that Rude walks into the room, his presence confident as he asks if this is the Alchemy Club room. He expresses interest in joining, catching Henneth off guard. Her initial reaction is to fluster and stammer, quickly saying that he isn't even a magician, almost as if trying to dismiss his request. However, her friend, having overheard the conversation and noticing Henneth's discomfort, quickly hands Rude the registration form. She gives Henneth a knowing look, realizing that Rude is the very person Henneth had been worried about. With a wink, she excused herself, saying that Henneth would show Rude around. Once Rude finishes registering, Henneth takes his form and looks over it, reading the reason for his application. She's taken aback when she sees that he's applying to develop potions and other medicines, something that she hadn't expected. It strikes her as unusual, as she knows Rude is far from being a typical magician. Her mind races, trying to process this new information, and she quickly scurries off, telling Rude that she would look into the research records for him, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. As Rude stands in the Alchemy Club room, his attention is drawn to the work Henneth is immersed in. The papers and books scattered across the table catch his eye, and he realizes that she is studying mana fever. The condition arises from unique constitutions and diseases that emerge from unknown causes, and mana fever is one of the most dangerous. It occurs when the body can't handle the release of mana, causing an overwhelming fever that is incurable. The patient eventually succumbs to death, unable to cope with the excess mana. Rude immediately thinks of Damien's past condition, which is similar in nature. In his previous life, Henneth spends countless hours trying to find a cure for Rude's older sister, Riala, who suffers from mana fever. Despite her tireless efforts and extensive research, Henneth is too late. Riala passes away before the cure can be created. The grief is devastating, and Henneth falls into a deep sorrow, unable to move past the loss. It is Rude who has to scold her, reminding her that they have a larger purpose, to deal with the dragons. Eventually, Rude succeeds in overcoming that challenge, but the memory of Riala's death always lingers in their minds. Now, in this new timeline, Henneth is once again researching mana fever, this time with the hope of saving her sister. Rude, who sees the pain in her eyes, decides to speak up. He tells her that he has witnessed a patient who has been cured of mana fever, a rare and unlikely occurrence. Henneth's eyes widen, and she becomes immediately agitated, demanding to know who the patient is and where she is located. Rude hesitates for a moment before revealing that the patient is a woman with a very foul temper. She has dedicated her entire life to researching a cure for mana fever. Unfortunately, she has died before she could share her findings. Despite this, Rude has managed to learn a few things by observing her methods, though he admits that his knowledge of alchemy is limited. He continues, explaining that if they can find the right ingredients, Henneth should be able to create the medicine. He promises to help her with the process, but in exchange he asks for a few potions. He will need a large supply for the future, and this is the only way he can ensure that he'll have access to them. Henneth, overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion, immediately hugs him tightly, thanking him for his willingness to help. She feels a sense of hope rising within her, something she hasn't felt in a long time. Rude, however, is cautious. He hopes that this time Henneth won't be too late. Every year, near the end of autumn, Iradium hosts a grand festival. The festival marks the beginning of the human era, celebrating the sealing away of the 7 dragons by the first dragon slayers. This event is celebrated not just in Iradium but across the entire empire. The festival draws in many visitors, including outsiders from beyond the Althea Empire. It is a time of great excitement and joy for everyone involved. However, Ryan feels upset during the festival. She wishes she could explore the festivities with Rude, but he is too busy, leaving her to wonder why he cannot spend time with her. Ryan, alongside Henneth, sits in a corner looking exasperated. They both sigh at the same time, startled by their simultaneous reaction to the situation. Both of them feel lonely, especially since they are at the festival without their friends. Ryan turns to Henneth and asks why she is at the festival alone. Henneth, flustered, recalls how she is usually with Rude, but something feels off this time. Even though Rude and Ryan are not dating, Henneth is still uncomfortable, realizing that she is lonely too. She returns Ryan's question, wondering why Ryan seems so lonely as well. It becomes clear that they have both been left behind by their friends. As they talk, Henneth is about to bring up a different topic, but she is interrupted when Lenia approaches. Lenia greets Henneth and introduces herself to Ryan, explaining that she is also Rude's friend. Not long after, Henneth and Lenia start bickering with each other, much to the amusement of passing students, who watch them and whisper to one another. Soon, Balak appears, dressed in the traditional clothing of native tribal people. He proudly claims that his family wears these clothes during the festival, as it is part of their tradition. Willem is seen standing beside him, also wearing the same outfit. Henneth is surprised to see Willem dressed this way and asks when they became friends. Balak explains that Willem is actually much tougher than he appears and that he invited him to a muscle training session. The two of them have been bonding over physical activities for the past few weeks. As the girls roll their eyes at the situation, commenting that Balak and Willem are covered in sweat, they decide to head off in another direction. They eventually arrive at an ice cream shop, where Henneth remarks about how Rude had somehow managed to bring everyone together. However, it also seems like he has his own hidden agenda, since he is not present with them now. Henneth and Lenia begin to bicker once again, but Ryan quietly decides to leave. She reflects on the fact that Rude is not with them, because he is preparing for the future he has already seen and spoken to her about. She hopes that he isn't trying to shoulder all those burdens alone. Meanwhile, Rude is at another location, having just finished reading research books and records. He is deep in thought, focusing on his work. Peldrua teases Rude for taking so long to absorb such a small amount of knowledge. Rude, unfazed, retorts that Peldrua can't judge human intelligence by his own standards, considering he is the king's spirit and not bound by human limitations. Peldrua then brings up an important point. Despite Rude's ability to draw on mana to enhance his physical abilities, his human body still has its limits. No matter how much Rude amplifies his strength, he cannot overcome the natural constraints of his body. Peldrua asks how Rude had dealt with this issue in his past life. Rude calmly responds that there was nothing to solve because he simply lived with it until his body broke down. He explains that his arms and legs became stiff, and he was constantly coughing up blood, yet it didn't stop him from fighting. The reality of their battle against the 7 dragons, beings known as moving catastrophes, made any personal sacrifice, even his life, seem insignificant. Rude is determined to rid the world of the dragons, especially one that had taken his brother away. He also mentions that he still has one last trick up his sleeve if things go wrong. After his conversation with Peldrua, Rude heads to the school director's office. When Gerard de Graham, the director, sees Rude, he is surprised. Gerard is a legend in his own right, known as the Slaughterer, for having decapitated countless dragons in his time. He is most famous for surviving the mission to slay the ever-changing dragon, a feat that few could ever hope to achieve. Though Gerard has retired from the front lines due to the severe injuries he sustained during that battle, his remarkable achievements earned him the prestigious position of Director of Iradium. Gerard asks Rude why he has come to see him, to which Rude responds that he had the opportunity to speak with Damien about several things. One of those topics involved Gerard himself. It turns out that Gerard is Damien's grandfather. Rude also brings up the peculiar constitution Gerard had when he was younger and the mention of a strange heart. Gerard's expression grows dark, and he demands to know what Rude is talking about. Rude doesn't hesitate, and directly reveals that it is about the ever-changing dragon's heart that Gerard had implanted into Damien. The revelation sends Gerard into a fit of rage. In an instant, he charges at Rude with incredible force, smashing the desk in his path. He grabs Rude by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Rude attempts to retaliate with a sword-chi slash, but Gerard effortlessly stops the attack with his hand. Undeterred, Rude triggers an explosion, creating enough force to break free from Gerard's grasp. As Rude lands on the ground, Gerard growls, warning him that he should be prepared to face death for revealing such a dangerous secret. Gerard then launches a deadly attack, aiming to end Rude's life. Rude realizes just in time that Gerard's intentions are lethal, not just a simple warning. He tries to parry the attack, but the sheer force of Gerard's strike is overwhelming. In a split second, Rude uses a low-tier wind spiritual art to escape, narrowly avoiding the attack. Even so, Gerard's strike grazes him, leaving a painful wound. Rude quickly applies potions to heal himself, but the damage is significant. His four-wing activation, though powerful, is nowhere near enough to counter Gerard's overwhelming mana concentration. Gerard's power is leagues above his own, and Rude understands the danger of facing him directly. Despite the odds, Rude remains calm. He knows he won't be fighting Gerard alone. Just as Gerard is about to launch another attack, a figure suddenly appears. It is Ein Bryce, who strikes at Gerard with a powerful attack. Gerard reacts instantly, jumping back to dodge the strike. Several days ago, Rude had informed Ein Bryce about his plans to deal with the ever-changing dragon's heart, explaining that he needed time to carry out the procedure. Rude asked Ein Bryce to hold off Gerard without resorting to killing him, a request Ein Bryce agreed to after seeing the unwavering determination in Rude's eyes. When the confrontation with Gerard finally comes, Rude tries to reason with him. He tells Gerard that they have a plan to save Damien, but Gerard is steadfast in his refusal to believe that removing the heart will do any good. Gerard insists that destroying the heart will lead to Damien's death, and he won't allow it. He recalls that when he took the heart from the ever-changing dragon, Ein Bryce had warned him that Damien wouldn't survive it. Yet Damien had lived without issue ever since. Gerard demands to know why Ein Bryce's stance has changed now. Rude calmly explains that they intend to remove the heart, despite Gerard's objections. Angered by this, Gerard launches a furious attack at Rude. Ein Bryce quickly intervenes, telling Gerard not to upset himself further. He reassures Rude to continue with the plan, promising to hold Gerard off while Rude focuses on the heart. Gerard, not wanting Rude to leave, attempts to strike again, but Ein Bryce intercepts his attack. The two warriors engage in a fierce clash, with Ein Bryce retaliating using the whirlwind of the heavenly spearmanship. As the battle rages on, Rude is relieved that things are proceeding as planned. He begins to make his way to find Damien, feeling a sense of urgency. However, just as he is about to leave, an ominous feeling washes over him. His expression turns grim as a sense of foreboding fills the air. Meanwhile, Damien is struggling with intense pain. He coughs up dark blood, feeling the agony in his body. The pain is unbearable, and he can't help but feel as if it's all connected to being provoked to the brink of despair. Damien believes the only way to escape this torment is to distance himself from others, hoping that the pain will subside if he isolates himself long enough. At that moment, Jeremy approaches Damien with a malicious intent, taunting him and calling him a monster. He accuses Damien of being nothing but a walking catastrophe, a threat to everyone around him. These cruel words strike deep within Damien, pushing him closer to the edge. Unable to withstand the barrage of insults, Damien grabs Jeremy, pinning him against the wall, trying to stop the torment. But Jeremy persists, his words relentless, and they start to weigh heavily on Damien's already fragile state of mind. As Jeremy taunts him further, Damien's resolve begins to break down. He feels the crushing weight of what Jeremy says, that his very existence is a disaster for those around him. In a moment of utter despair, Damien reaches for the dagger Jeremy had pulled out, ready to end it all. But as the blade nears, he suddenly remembers the words of his grandfather and Rude. Both had urged him to hold on and fight to stay alive. In that split second, Damien manages to block the dagger at the last possible moment, his hand trembling as he catches it. However, the action unknowingly triggers a far more dangerous consequence. The ever-changing dragon's heart within Damien reacts violently, unleashing an overwhelming and terrifying aura. The air thickens, and the sky above turns into a blood-red hue, transforming into a crimson night that fills the world with dread. Rude, who had been making his way to find Damien, immediately senses the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. His eyes widen in horror as he realizes the worst possible outcome has come to pass. The second coming of the ever-changing dragon has begun. As the dark liquid begins to fall from the sky like rain, Ryan and the others realize that something is terribly wrong. The rain isn't water, its pieces of mana, dark and malevolent. Ryan feels a deep sense of unease, sensing a blind and insatiable desire within the mana. It is gluttony, an all-consuming hunger that she knows only too well. The pieces of mana then shift and transform, forming into monstrous creatures that charge at a father and his daughter. Without hesitation, Ryan springs into action, engaging the monsters head-on and urging the father and daughter to run. She faces the oncoming horde, determined to protect them. Nearby, a male student is paralyzed by fear at the sight of the monsters, and he collapses onto the ground. Ryan, noticing his fear, shouts at him to snap out of it. She tells him that he must either run or fight. The student hesitates but then gathers his courage, and others begin to join the fight. Some help the people escape, while others turn their attention to the monsters. As the battle intensifies, Ryan realizes that the monster dogs they are fighting are not staying down. Despite their injuries, the monsters are regenerating rapidly. Ryan narrows her focus, her determination clear, and she unleashes a critical air slash. The attack cuts through the air with precision, obliterating the monsters completely, much to the surprise of the students around her. They are in awe of her power, but Ryan's mind is elsewhere. She knows that the source of this chaos is none other than the ever-changing dragon. Ryan quickly formulates a plan, urging the students to spread out and protect the citizens, ensuring the injured are evacuated to safety. She tells them to hold their ground while she seeks out Rude. As she turns to leave, another form emerges from the swirling dark mana. This is no ordinary monster. It is the result of the ever-changing dragon's shape-shifting ability. The creature takes on the appearance of someone it has devoured, growing stronger with each victim. Ryan steels herself, understanding that this new threat will only complicate her mission to find Rude. Meanwhile, Rude is filled with concern. The worst-case scenario he had feared is unfolding before him. He looks to his grandmaster, urging him to follow through with their plan. But before he can focus fully on the task at hand, his eyes widen in horror. Out of the dark mana, a grotesque figure emerges. Damien, now transformed into a winged monster, a twisted reflection of the boy he once knew. Damien's transformation is a nightmare. His features are distorted, his body now monstrous with wings and claws, an embodiment of the ever-changing dragon's influence. His grandfather, seeing the transformation, is overwhelmed with grief and fear. He recalls the tragic death of his own son and wife, all because he was trying to save the world. Now, standing before him is his grandson, consumed by the dragon's heart, the very thing that has doomed him. Damien charges at his grandfather, his claws raised for the kill. But the old man does not move to defend himself. He closes his eyes, seemingly resigned to his fate, ready to accept whatever comes. Rude, despite the immense pressure, manages to defend against Damien's furious attacks. He blocks the strikes, his mind focused on the crucial task at hand. He knows that even though Damien's body is being used by the ever-changing dragon, Keanil's movements still hold patterns that Rude can recognize, patterns he memorized during their training sessions. This familiarity gives him an edge as he begins to launch his counterattacks, but he is quickly interrupted when Gerard charges at him, unwilling to let him harm his grandson. Gerard's assault is met with Ein Bryce's intervention. He intercepts the attack and scolds Rude for putting himself in harm's way, insisting that he shouldn't be attacking Damien, who is no longer fully himself but controlled by the dragon. Rude, however, refuses to back down. He retorts that he can't let Gerard die no matter what. Ein Bryce, frustrated, reminds Rude that it is Gerard's fault in the first place for allowing the heart to be placed into Damien. He points out that Gerard should have been prepared for this inevitable outcome. Yet Rude refuses to accept that anyone needs to die. He is determined to end this without further bloodshed, clinging to the hope that dealing with the heart could still save Damien. Ein Bryce reluctantly agrees but warns Rude that time is running out. Damien's transformation has progressed too far. Even if Rude succeeds in removing the heart, it may already be too late to save him. Damien's true self may be completely consumed by the dragon's influence. Rude, undeterred, urges Ein Bryce to follow through with their plan, and Ein Bryce moves to face Gerard, preparing to keep him occupied while Rude deals with the heart. As Damien charges at Rude again, his speed is remarkable. With a quick slash, Damien tests Rude's defenses, and though the attack is fast and powerful, Rude manages to block it, his training with Damien's fighting style giving him an advantage. He studies Damien's movements carefully, realizing that the body is still mostly under Keanil's control, but not entirely. It becomes clear to Rude that Keanil's core must be located in Damien's neck, and if he destroys it, he could stop Keanil's regeneration, preventing the dragon from fully taking over Damien's body. The cost, however, would be Damien's life. Rude steels himself, knowing that this is the only way to stop the creature without leaving any room for further devastation. He pulls out a battle axe, his weapon of choice for this moment, and begins launching powerful blows at Keanil, who is using Damien's body. The dragon's movements are erratic, but Rude's strikes connect. landing a series of punches that leave Kianil gasping for air, spitting out blood. For a moment, Rude feels a rush of confidence, believing he is gaining the upper hand. However, Kianil, now realizing that its control is slipping, releases a violent surge of mana. The force of the attack knocks Rude back, his body bruised and battered from the impact. He quickly regains his footing, noting how Kianil is adapting to his attacks. The dragon is learning, and Rude knows that he must finish this before it becomes fully accustomed to the body and its abilities. With Rude's blood dripping from his wounded hands, Kianil speaks in a dark, guttural voice. The hunger within him is palpable, and he taunts Rude, reveling in the pain he has caused. Rude knows this is the moment when Kianil will make his move, and he braces himself. Suddenly, Kianil withdraws his mana, and a massive magical circle forms around him. Rude, in the midst of a chaotic battle, activates his Hooper sense to quickly dodge the massive attacks unleashed by Kianil. His reflexes sharpened. He evades each strike with precision, but he knows he can't keep dodging forever. The battle with Kianil has escalated to a level where he must use everything at his disposal. Reluctantly, he reaches for the blasphemous blade, Demios, a weapon known for its dangerous drain on mana. Yet, faced with no other choice, he channels the weapon's power and unleashes a tremendous air slash. The attack rips through Kianil's assault, clearing the path momentarily. As they pause, Pildrua, having observed the fight, asks Rude if he's holding up well. He mentions that Kianil's ability to absorb the powers of those it consumes is well known, especially given its impressive magical prowess. Rude, wiping blood from his face, responds that it should be no surprise. 10 years ago, Kianil devoured hundreds of dragon slayers, further strengthening its abilities. To keep himself in the fight, Rude quickly pours potions on himself, healing his wounds, his determination unwavering. The clash resumes, and Rude notices that Kianil's movements have become even smoother in the brief time they've been fighting. The dragon's adaptability is formidable, yet Rude isn't overly concerned. He knows that while Damien's combat skills have certainly grown, they are still far below Rude's level, especially considering his own experience from his previous life. With this confidence, Rude launches a counterattack, a precise slash to Kianil's chest. The strike causes the dragon to roar in fury, but before Rude can capitalize, Kianil retaliates with another high-tier magic attack. Rude feels the strain. This might be a battle he can't win through defense alone. In that moment, Rude recalls the words of Arthur, his mentor. Arthur had told him that his spearmanship was approaching its full potential, and to take the final step, he needed to learn through real combat. Arthur had gifted him with a technique known as the lightning spear. Now Rude knows it's time to use it. With a flash of realization, he unleashes the lightning spear toward Kianil, the spear crackling with energy, ready to pierce through the dragon's formidable defenses. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Balak and the others are fending off the relentless onslaught of monster dogs. They are numerous, and despite their best efforts, they just keep coming. Realizing that the fight is escalating, Lenia steps forward, kneeling down as the monsters charge toward her. With a calm but focused demeanor, she activates her spiritual power, freezing the monsters in place and turning them into ice. Her voice cuts through the chaos as she orders Henneth to destroy them, having already rounded up the frozen beasts in a confined space. Henneth responds with a fierce determination, stacking spells on top of each other and unleashing a massive explosion that obliterates the frozen dogs. Lenia, brushing off her hands as she stands, comments on how she didn't kill the creatures, merely immobilized them, despite the fact that it might have been easier to finish them off outright. Balak, hearing this, sighs in frustration, but acknowledges that Lenia has bought them valuable time. He takes the front lines again, urging everyone to replenish their mana while they can. However, before they can catch their breath, the dark mana continues to swirl and coalesce. A humanoid figure forms from the remnants of the dark liquid, its movements reflecting a combat style that closely resembles the Steros style. Balak's eyes narrow as he recognizes the deadly efficiency of the form. Balak, locked in combat with the humanoid figure, realizes the overwhelming power he's facing. The mana emanating from the creature and its strength resemble the perfect power of an ancient ancestor, a force that feels both foreign and unnervingly familiar. As they exchange blows, Balak dodges with all his might, but the difference in strength is painfully clear. Every hit he takes sends shockwaves through his body, and he can feel his stamina draining. The battle seems unwinnable, but Balak refuses to back down. Despite the injuries he's sustained, he steels himself, determined to retaliate with whatever he has left. Just as the fight seems to reach its peak, Professor Mason steps in, halting both combatants. Her presence commands attention as she swiftly assesses the situation. With a steady voice, she asks if both of them are all right, to which they respond affirmatively, though clearly weary. But the humanoid form doesn't relent, instead multiplying as it grows stronger. Mason reassures the group, her tone firm, that they would be fine, and she would deal with the multiplying monsters. Meanwhile, Professor Danil, surveying the situation, takes charge of the situation with the monsters. He handles the emerging threats with efficiency, instructing the students that the Imperial Order of the Black Wolves has arrived to deal with the remaining beasts. The sound of heavy footsteps echoes as Levin Adelph, the captain of the Black Wolves, steps forward. His eyes are cold and determined as he dismissively remarks that he's not here just to deal with the monster dogs. Instead, he wants to battle the true enemy, the ever-changing dragon. Levin demands to be led to the main body of the dragon. Ryan, who had been silently observing, doesn't hide her disdain. Coldly, she remarks that there are more pressing issues than Levin's pride and dignity. Her words sting, and Levin's eyes flash with anger. He takes a step forward, clearly ready to escalate the confrontation, but is swiftly stopped by a sharp warning from Professor Danil. Levin hesitates, then orders his Black Wolves members to focus on the remaining monster dogs. As the air grows tense, everyone hears the unmistakable sound of Rude and Kianil clashing in the distance. Rude had thrown the lightning spear with great force, but it wasn't quite enough to land a fatal blow. The attack, although powerful, was slightly off target. Rude had pushed himself to the limit, expending a large portion of his mana from his heavenly domain. Kianil is badly injured, struggling to stay on its feet. The dragon's twisted body looks for something to devour, its desperation palpable as it searches for any means to stay alive. With horrifying speed, Kianil sinks its teeth into Gerard's hand, its jaws crushing down as it begins to feed, drawing strength from the blood of the one who had once been its father. Gerard gasps in pain, his body fighting the pull, but Kianil, now revitalized, becomes stronger with each passing second. Bryce, witnessing this scene unfold, reacts swiftly, launching a powerful attack toward Kianil to end the threat. But Gerard, now in a desperate attempt to shield his grandson, steps forward, creating a barrier that deflects Bryce's strike. In a cruel twist, Gerard is swallowed whole by Kianil, who regains its strength completely but still hungers for more. The monstrous dragon, now invigorated, turns its gaze toward Rude, whose injuries and drained potions have left him weakened and vulnerable. Kianil charges at him with renewed ferocity, the gap in strength becoming painfully clear. Rude, battered and bruised, struggles to keep his footing as he faces Kianil's relentless onslaught. His strength falters, and for a brief moment, self-doubt creeps in. He thinks that perhaps if his physical body were stronger, he could endure this battle. But in the midst of his internal turmoil, Rude remembers Rion's teachings from his previous life. She had always emphasized the importance of understanding subtle patterns, of not reacting immediately to movements, but rather anticipating them. With a renewed sense of clarity, Rude steadies himself. His mental fortitude, honed over countless battles, resurfaces, and he begins to see the patterns in Kianil's attacks. With this newfound awareness, he finds an opening. He launches a ferocious counterattack, his sword cutting through the air with precision. Kianil is momentarily caught off guard by the intensity of the strike, but it quickly adapts, responding with an onslaught of its own. Despite this, Rude presses on, his instincts guiding him through the chaos. In a decisive moment, Rude spots the perfect opportunity. He doesn't react immediately. Instead, he calmly watches the shifting movements of the dragon. Then, in a swift motion, he delivers a critical sword strike directly at Kianil's core, stabbing deep into its form. Kianil roars in agony, the pain reverberating through the air as Rude rips his blade downward, causing the dragon to howl in frustration and pain. But as the blade sinks into Kianil, Rude realizes something dire. His mana in the heavenly domain has been completely drained. With no reserves left to draw upon, Rude finds himself physically and mentally spent. The realization hits hard. He's given everything he has, but it might not be enough to finish the fight. Meanwhile, back with Ryan and the others, the professors lead the group toward the northern tower, where Rude's battle with Kianil is taking place. The tension in the air is palpable as they approach the tower. But as they reach the top, they are greeted by a horrific sight. Rude is being consumed by Kianil. The ever-changing dragon, now even more powerful and ravenous, has begun to devour him, and it seems as though all hope is slipping away. Rion stands frozen in shock when she sees the condition Rude is in. She is terrified, but Rude notices her and tells her not to do anything. He struggles, using all his strength to escape, though part of his upper arm is torn off as Kianil's mouth clamps down on it. Despite the pain, Rude had already driven his sword deep into Kianil's neck, aiming for its core. However, Kianil, with a twisted laugh, is able to remove the sword, mocking Rude and claiming that since Rude has exhausted all his chances, the only thing left for him is to be eaten. At that moment, Kianil bursts open, spurting blood everywhere. Rude smirks and taunts it, expecting Kianil to devour him. But to everyone's surprise, Kianil's entire body starts to erupt with blood. Rude, still standing strong, reveals something shocking. He has a unique attribute within his body. This attribute is the reason he survived when he and his brother were children in Daysol. Rude explains that it's because of the special blood of Donatos, a bloodline that runs through his family. 10 years ago, when a Terra dragon attacked his family, killed his mother, and swallowed his father, the dragon died almost instantly. Afterward, they discovered that their family's blood was a deadly poison to dragons. They didn't know how or why, but it didn't matter. They were focused on survival. Rude now knows that his very existence is a curse to dragonkind. He picks up his sword and points it at Kianil. Professor Mason and Daniel try to stop him, but they are held back by Ein Bryce, who orders them not to interfere. Meanwhile, Damien regains control of his body. He grabs a sword and stabs it directly into Kianil's core, apologizing to Rude for everything he has done. Rude, however, quickly acts. He pulls out 2 potions and pours them over Damien's wounds. The moment the liquid touches his skin, Damien's wounds heal instantly. Rude then holds out his sword again, ready for whatever comes next. Peldrua steps in and tells him that Kianil's adaptability has caused Damien's mana paths to twist and unravel. The mana now circulates around his body in a chaotic manner. Even if Damien recovers physically, he will die from the mana imbalance unless Rude uses the Blasphemous Blade. This special sword can cut through the flow of mana and requires precise knowledge of the mana vessels in the body, as well as perfect understanding of human anatomy. Rude, understanding the gravity of the situation, uses the blade to cut through Damien's tangled mana paths. The potions then help heal the flow of mana, reconstructing the correct channels. While all this is happening, Gerard and the others watch in confusion. They think Rude is punishing Damien for everything that has happened, but once Rude is done, Damien is perfectly fine. His body has healed completely, without a trace of his previous wounds. Rude turns to Gerard, looking determined, and says, "He won't let anyone die." But as he finishes speaking, Rude suddenly collapses. Everyone rushes over to him in panic. Ein Bryce is summoned to the Imperial Palace to discuss the recent events, where the Emperor demands the execution of Gerard and Damien for committing what is seen as grand treason. However, out of respect for Ein Bryce's request and his contribution in the events that transpired, the Emperor decides to imprison the culprits instead, putting off any further discussions until they have heard from Rude, who is credited with slaying the ever-changing dragon. Ein Bryce visits Rude at the hospital, where Ryan is taking care of him. Ryan excused herself from the room, giving them privacy to talk. As she leaves, she is sober, feeling guilty for being unable to help Rude, despite promising she would. She resolves inwardly to make sure she can be of assistance next time. Ein Bryce asks Rude why he went to such extremes to save Damien and Gerard, even at the cost of ruining his own body. Rude replies that it was a small price to pay in order to defeat one of the 7 dragons. Ein Bryce, proud of him, ruffles Rude's hair and tells him he is proud of him, though Rude feels awkward at the praise. 4 weeks later, Rude arrives at the palace in a royal carriage. As he makes his way to the palace, he reflects on how lucky he was to defeat Kianil, relying on Donatos' blood, but he still feels distant from his brother, who had fought the lightning dragon in their previous life. He is escorted into the palace by a guard, and upon entering, he sees all the guildmasters gathered. He wonders if they are there to discuss the incident, but he realizes this might be an even better opportunity. In the Grand Hall, he sees the Crown Prince of the Alfea Empire, Grim Bernstein, sitting on the throne. The prince's full name, Varner Bernstein, is known to all. Varner was originally born without a surname, and only received the Bernstein name after marrying into the family of the first emperor. Rude approaches and pays his respects to the Crown Prince, who commends him for his contribution. The Crown Prince praises him for slaying the ever-changing dragon without a single casualty. Rude, displaying elegant politeness, graciously thanks the Crown Prince, to the point where even his Grandmaster shudders in shock. However, the Crown Prince then asks if there is anything Rude would like as a reward. To everyone's surprise, Rude requests that Gerard and Damien be pardoned and spared from execution. The room falls silent at this unexpected request. The Crown Prince and the others, including Levin, are startled by Rude's words. Levin, quick to react, dismisses Rude's request as pompous, suggesting that Rude only succeeded due to luck and that it is unreasonable to pardon the 2 men. However, the Crown Prince gestures for Levin to stop. He then tells Rude that granting his request will be difficult, something Rude had expected. Rude doesn't back down. Instead, he takes out the sealstone of the lightning dragon and presents it to everyone. The sight of the powerful artifact catches everyone's attention. Rude, undeterred, is ready to make his case. The lightning dragon, Harma, is one of the 7 dragons and is renowned for its strength and intelligence. It is the only dragon lord among them capable of using polymorph abilities, despite not being dragonkin. Harma is also highly strategic, often retreating during a defensive position to prepare for a second attack. Many dragon slayers lost their lives in Rude's previous life while trying to stop Harma. It was only through the combined efforts of many, including Aesir, that they were able to defeat the lightning dragon. Rude presents the sealstone of Harma, causing immediate alarm among the guild masters. Levin, in particular, raises his sword, accusing Rude of bringing a dangerous object into the imperial palace. Despite the rising tension, the Crown Prince orders everyone to lower their weapons and asks Rude where he obtained the sealstone and the reason for bringing it out. Rude explains that he found it in the vault of Aradium, but has no knowledge of how or why it was there. He states that the sealstone is in a precarious state, at risk of breaking at any moment, and wants to use it to make a proposal. Rihanna confirms that Rude's claim is true and that the sealstone is indeed fragile. Rude reveals his plan. Once the sealstone breaks, he intends to kill the lightning dragon, and subsequently all the remaining dragons, with the goal of exterminating their kind from the world. His declaration leaves the room in stunned silence. Levin, unable to accept Rude's confidence, accuses him of thinking himself a hero because of his victory over the remnants of the ever-changing dragon. He criticizes Rude for underestimating the true danger of the 7 dragons. Rude, however, responds by implying that Levin's fear would lead him to do nothing while dragons continue to ravage the world. Levin is angered by this and begins to react, but the Crown Prince intervenes. The Crown Prince then addresses Rude, stating that his confidence is misplaced. He reminds Rude that even their forefather, the great Varnar, was unable to kill the dragons. Varnar had only been able to seal the dragons away and drive the remaining dragonkind beyond the Great Mountain Range. This history, the Crown Prince emphasizes, shows that defeating the dragons is far beyond any single person's capabilities. The lightning dragon, Harma, is known to be even deadlier than the ever-changing dragon. Rude acknowledges the immense challenge ahead and admits that it would be impossible for him to defeat the lightning dragon alone. To increase his chances of success, he proposes 2 critical requirements. The first is a controlled environment, a field to trap the beast and prevent widespread casualties during the battle. He suggests that the only magician capable of creating such a dimensional space is Iris Hapla, the ruler of the Crimson Tower. Rude estimates that a year and a half would be enough time for the dimensional space to be ready. The second requirement is that everyone in the room, except for the Crown Prince, must participate in the battle. Rude emphasizes that there is no need to lead a massive army of slayers to their deaths. A realm large enough to accommodate that many people wouldn't be stable enough and would take much longer to create. Abel, however, voices skepticism about the plan, questioning how Rude can be sure they won't be massacred inside the limited space. Rude argues that the greatest fighting strength is gathered in the Imperial Palace, and if they are to have any chance of success, they must give their best effort. He assures them that they have time to prepare. The Crown Prince, after considering Rude's words, agrees to the request, which surprises Levin. The Crown Prince then speaks, acknowledging Rude's determination to fight the dragons to the end, despite being a fledgling warrior. He expresses that Rude could become a spark of hope that will save the southern region from the hellscape it has become. In light of this, the Crown Prince pardons the executions of Damien and his grandfather. He also appoints Rude as the head commander of the Lightning Dragon campaign. Damien and his grandfather are released from prison and reunited. His grandfather expresses deep regret for his actions, admitting that he had wanted to protect his grandson without considering the consequences. He tells Damien to live on, despite the past mistakes. Damien, feeling the weight of his sins, hesitates, unsure whether he can continue living with the guilt. However, his grandfather reassures him, sharing Rude's belief that sins committed in an attempt to save someone or to survive deserve forgiveness, at least once. A month after the ever-changing dragon's attack on Aradium, the Imperial Chamber officially acknowledged the incident and made public the discovery of the Lightning Dragon's sealstone within the Aradium vault. Rude, now recognized as the new inheritor of heavenly spearmanship, has gained significant acclaim for slaying the ever-changing dragon single-handedly. The Empire, undeterred by the strong opposition from neighboring countries, has appointed him as the commander of the Lightning Dragon campaign. This unprecedented move includes recognizing the return of the 7 dragons and preparing to break the seal to launch a preemptive strike against them. Henneth, reviewing the news, reflects on the Crown Prince's view of Rude as a young hero in the making. She realizes that the Empire is using this recognition to rally support from across the continent, positioning Rude as a central figure. However, Henneth finds it frustrating that Rude refuses to ask for their help. Lenia explains that it's because, in their eyes, they are not strong enough, and they weren't of much help to him during the previous incident. This makes Henneth feel guilty, as Rude had provided her with a clue on how to cure her sister. Balak, attempting to console her, points out that they are still rookies, a reality they came to understand during the last event. He emphasizes that they must now focus on getting stronger, preparing for the day when Rude will need their assistance. Meanwhile, Jeremy is in his office, lost in thought about the pardoning of Damien and Gerard. His musings are interrupted when Rude bursts into the room, visibly angry. Without a word, Rude punches Jeremy in the face, then grabs him by the collar. Despite his anger, Rude refrains from following through on his threat, saying he considered bashing him, but will let him off the hook this time. He demands that Jeremy confirm something for him. Rude, still visibly angry, confronts Jeremy and asks how he knows that Damien has the ever-changing dragon's heart inside him. Jeremy, surprisingly calm despite the situation, reveals that he possesses a special eye, a gift passed down through his family for generations. This eye gives him exceptional eyesight and perceptiveness. He explains that his ability to see the flow of mana is particularly extraordinary, which allows him to detect something unusual with Damien. He pieces together the clues and concludes that Damien has the ever-changing dragon's heart inside him. Rude, still frustrated, questions why Jeremy hasn't reported this to the Imperial Chamber and instead secretly caused chaos by withholding such important information. He accuses Jeremy of possibly wanting to play the hero. Jeremy, taking a deep breath, admits that Rude's plan is much more effective than his own. However, he clarifies that he never had any desire to be a hero. What he truly wants is to witness history firsthand and be part of a hero's legacy. He wants to experience the chronicle of events with his own eyes, much like the first dragon slayer Varnar had done. Jeremy then proposes that Rude is a legend in the making, and all he wants is to accompany him, offering help as a friend. His ultimate goal is to be the bard who will record the history of Rude's rise. Rude, however, is not moved. He coldly replies that he has no interest in becoming a legendary warrior. He then realizes why Jeremy gave him the cold shoulder in his previous life. It is because, in that life, Rude has always been at the warrior's side, the very position Jeremy desired for himself. Rude's thoughts then drift to his past life. His older brother, Asura, has everything that could make him a great warrior. Asura is strong, skilled, and brave. However, he isn't perfect. He makes mistakes, as all humans do. Yet, despite these flaws, Asura always gives his best effort, even if it means damaging his body in the process. Despite his hard work, Asura faces criticism and hatred from those around him. Rude is determined not to follow the same path this time. He refuses to be burdened by the weight of others' expectations and criticisms. With that thought, he turns to leave, wanting to put the conversation behind him. But before he can walk away, Jeremy unexpectedly clings to his leg. This action startles Rude, and Jeremy, in a pleading tone, insists that Rude must become the warrior. Jeremy then reveals something that makes Rude pause. Jeremy comes from Atun, the kingdom known as the center of trade on the continent. Atun shares borders with several powerful regions: the Althea Empire, the Maharan Kingdom, the Kingdom of Sorcery, Parma, and the Kingdom of Spirits, Bernica. It is a place where people from all over gather to trade, and it serves as a hub of commerce and culture. And that was also the place Rude spent his days back when he was a mercenary. Jeremy continues, explaining that his family, the Deville family, were once aristocrats before their fall. He and his father are the last remaining members, but his father was murdered. After his father's death, Jeremy starts organizing their belongings in the basement. While doing so, he discovers an old chest sealed with preservation magic. His father, a heavy drinker, likely dismissed the chest as worthless, but Jeremy recognizes that it is centuries old, at least several hundreds of years. Inside the chest, Jeremy finds a collection of extremely old items: books, paintings, music sheets, manuscripts, and a diary. The diary, he learns, was left behind by the chest's owner, Alan Duville. This name rings a bell for Rude, as Peldrua previously told him that Alan Duville was the bard who traveled with Varnar, the first warrior. As Jeremy flips through the pages of the diary, he realizes that it contains the chronicles of Varnar's life and exploits, documenting the history of the first warrior who became a legend. The diary kept a flawless record of everything Varnar and his companions did. Despite the subjective nature of the text, it serves as a remarkable account of historical events. Jeremy suggests that since Rude has appeared, and since he himself is a descendant of the bard who traveled with Varnar, it must be fate that their paths have crossed. Jeremy confidently declares that he is doing everything he can to be a part of the warriors group, and believes his intellect will be useful to Rude in their journey. However, Rude begins to realize something. Jeremy didn't seem to know about the seal stone of the lightning dragon in the Iradium vault. If Jeremy had known about it, he would have brought it up earlier. This leaves Rude to wonder if someone else had placed it there, or if it had been there since Iradium's founding. Rude then asks Jeremy if the diary contains any details about the 7 dragons, their sealing magic, or where and how they were sealed. Jeremy responds that while the diary does mention the special characteristics of the dragons, it offers no details on battles or their sealing. The diary is currently in Jeremy's residence, stored in the basement, and he offers Rude the keys to his house, but under one condition. Jeremy wants to be included in Rude's journey to become a warrior. Rude, however, makes it clear that he has no interest in becoming a warrior. He points out that, regardless of the Imperial Chamber's recognition, the official designation of a warrior is managed by the Church, and without the necessary token, one cannot be considered a true warrior. He further explains that the only reason he is allowing Jeremy to live is because of his exceptional eyes, which will be useful in the hunt for dragons. As long as Jeremy doesn't cause any more trouble, Rude agrees to let him accompany the mission. Jeremy, without hesitation, agrees and hands over the key to Rude. Rude is later seen discussing the issue of the lightning dragon's sealstone with his grandmaster, Ein Bryce. He points out that the discovery of the sealstone in the vault of Irradium must be the work of the person who originally sealed the lightning dragon. Ein Bryce, however, remarks that it seems like Rude is doubting the actions of their forefathers, despite being the inheritor of the heavenly spearmanship himself. In response, Rude suggests that even Ein Bryce must have questions about why Varnar, the first warrior, chose to seal the 7 dragons instead of exterminating them outright. Rude adds that Varnar had the strength to kill them, but instead pushed them beyond the Great Mountain Range, without leaving any information about their locations or the sealing methods for future generations. Rude then shifts the conversation, asking Ein Bryce if he attended Professor Arthur's inauguration, now that Arthur has become the new school director. Ein Bryce responds that he heard from Arthur that Rude had applied for a leave of absence. Rude explains that he plans to finish his first year at the academy, with around 6 months left to complete his courses. He intends to use this time to prepare for the upcoming Lightning Dragon campaign. Afterward, Rude plans to take a year-long leave to prepare further, and during that time, he will complete his second-year courses. He then shares his plan for his internship, stating that he will spend 2 years at 2 different guilds. First, he will go to Twilight Moon, mainly because of Abel's persistence and the exchange he made in return for his participation in the Lightning Dragon campaign. Afterward, he plans to intern at the Dragon Slayer Association, starting there first, because the Dragon of Delusion is expected to come after the Lightning Dragon. Rude intends to time his internship so that he arrives before the dragon appears, ready for what lies ahead. Ein Bryce then informs Rude that he will be heading to Parma in 6 months, emphasizing that the creation of the field for the Lightning Dragon campaign should be prioritized. Rude responds, explaining that he has already submitted a request to the Crimson Tower, so he will need to visit them in person. He also mentions that he will take the opportunity to learn some magic while he's there. However, before heading to Parma, Rude plans to stop by Atun, stating that there is something he needs to check. When Ein Bryce asks why, Rude simply says that it's something important. Meanwhile, at the Duville Manor, a small cloaked figure is seen rummaging through the chests in the basement, the very ones that Jeremy had spoken about. She mutters to herself, claiming that there's nothing of value, nothing but trash. After a brief moment, she leaves, seemingly unsatisfied with what she had found. 6 months later, winter has arrived, and Henneth is seen in her study, diligently working on her research. However, the cold seems to be getting to her as she sneezes, prompting Balak to ask why she's still studying instead of heading home since the school is closed for the year. Henneth bickers back, pointing out that he also plans on staying at the school during the break. Balak then hands her a cup of raw egg tea, explaining that it will help her stamina and warm her up quickly. But before he can continue, Henneth cuts him off, already knowing that he was about to talk about exercise again. Despite the cold, Henneth's research on mana fever is progressing well. She is working on a joint research project with the alchemy professor, using a formula Rude had given her. She's confident that, with enough time and effort, she will find a solution. However, Henneth can't help but wonder what's going on with Rude. He seems to know what's going to happen in the future, almost as if he's anticipating things. She recalls how he helped her with her research, seemingly aware of her sister's illness, and how he had requested a large number of potions during the battle with the ever-changing dragon, which turned out to be critical. Lost in thought, Henneth is suddenly startled as Rude approaches, placing a cup of hot tea against her face. He checks on her, reminding her not to slack off and to continue working hard while he is away. After that, he leaves, and Henneth is left with a host of questions. She wonders why Rude seems to know what's coming and how he is so unusually strong for his age. But despite her curiosity, she pushes the thoughts aside, knowing that it's more important to be there for him when he needs them the most. She heads back to her study, her mind still full of questions. Meanwhile, Balak is seen practicing martial arts, and Lenia is deep in her own practice, focused on her spiritual magic. Rude stands outside, dressed in a leather coat, yet still remarks that it's cold. Nearby, a large heap of snow catches his attention, and he absent-mindedly leans against it for support. To his surprise, the snow shifts, revealing that it's actually Ryan, who had been shivering beneath the snow. She had been waiting there for a long time, unsure of when Rude would be leaving, so she stayed outside to wait for him. Rude, startled by her sudden appearance, quickly wraps a scarf around her neck and head to keep the cold out. He knows well that Ryan struggles with the cold, something he learned in his previous life. He shares this with her, explaining his reasoning for the scarf. However, Ryan tries to reassure him, telling him not to feel guilty about what happened in his previous life. She insists that it wasn't his fault that her past self died, trying to ease his burden. Rude, though, flicks her forehead playfully, urging her not to dwell on the past. He tells her to focus on getting stronger during this time and to get along with others as well, encouraging her to move forward. Soon after, the carriage arrives, signaling that Rude's departure is imminent. He bids Ryan farewell, but she rushes over and wraps her arms around him in a hug. She tells him that she will miss him, and Rude watches as she lets go and steps back. As he climbs into the carriage, Rude reflects on Ryan's words. Though he wants to believe her, he knows deep down that he can't forget what happened in his previous life. The memories linger, and he feels that if one of the geniuses had survived, perhaps he wouldn't have been sent back in time in the first place. Determined to uncover the truth, Rude plans to investigate why they saved him and what it means for his future. Rude's journey to the capital city of Ibris takes him through a bustling metropolis at the heart of continental trade. The city, known as the Kingdom of Trade's capital, glows brightly in its center, though the outskirts are overshadowed by expansive rings of slums. The city, full of energy and commerce, contrasts starkly with the poverty that surrounds it. After a 30-minute carriage ride from the academy, followed by passing through the capital's warp gate multiple times, Rude finally reaches Ibris. But even with a map in hand, he struggles with directions, finding himself unable to locate the Duville family manor. Frustrated, he contemplates the situation, with Peldrua mocking him for his misfortune. As Rude continues to navigate the unfamiliar streets, a mercenary appears, demanding a toll for passing through the area. He orders Rude to hand over everything he has. Unfazed, Rude shows the mercenary the map, asking if he knows the location of the Duville family manor. The mercenary, whose patience wears thin, becomes furious and pulls out a weapon, claiming to be Bulbic, the beheader of the Wild Dogs Mercenary Company. But Rude remains calm and effortlessly sidesteps Bulbic's attack, placing his foot on the weapon to prevent it from being lifted. With a casual remark, Rude tells the mercenary that there was a time when he was indebted to that mercenary company, and that by seniority, he should outrank Bulbic. Realizing his mistake, Bulbic's bravado falters, and fear creeps in. He quickly changes his tune, agreeing to guide Rude to the manor. Peldrua, curious, asks Rude how he knows about the mercenary company. Rude explains that he had worked as a mercenary before joining Iradium, and that the company was composed of nobodies in the grand scheme of things. Once at the Duville family manor, Rude enters the building, immediately noticing a broken window. This, coupled with the eerie silence, leads him to believe that someone must still be inside. He pulls out his sword, becoming alert as he moves cautiously toward the basement. There, he discovers a dying fairy, her fragile form lying on the cold floor. Peldrua explains the grim situation, revealing that the fairy is likely enslaved and cursed by a dark magician. However, there is a sneak attack on Rude, who immediately sets up his barrier to block the attack. It turns out the attacker is actually the fairy's daughter, who thinks that Rude wants to attack her mother. She tries to strike using spirits, but they refuse to listen to her, causing an explosion. She is shocked, realizing that the spirits are not responding to her commands. The reason is that Rude has a contract with the King of Spirits. Peldrua informs Rude that the fairy child also carries a curse, as her leg, shackled with a chain, is worsening. Rude then grabs his sword and pokes her leg with it, causing the shackles to break off and her leg to heal. He then moves to check through the chest. However, the fairy child asks him if this is his house and if he is going to sell her off. Rude bluntly replies that this isn't his house, and he isn't interested in her story. He tells her to leave him alone and not bother him, as he plans to leave once he finds a book. She then brings out a book, asking if it's what Rude is looking for. She heads over to the fireplace, trying to threaten Rude by demanding that he heal her mother, or else she will burn the book. Rude then tries to explain that her mother is affected by a curse that has spread to her heart, and that no amount of magic or potions will help. He tells her that he can't save her mother. However, the fairy child doesn't believe him, claiming that he can save her mother just like he did for her. Rude considers knocking her out to take the book, but Peldrua reminds him that she is just a child, and it's hard for her to believe that her mother will die. Rude takes the book from her, telling her to think about how she is going to live and survive on her own. Meanwhile, the fairy child begins to cry and begs him to save her mother, saying she will do anything for him in exchange. Rude moves away from her, stating that she isn't worth anything, even if he takes her in. He tells her mother will die, and she will be left to fend for herself, so she should focus on getting stronger instead of acting pitiful. The girl retorts, saying that she doesn't want to act pitiful, but there's nothing she can do because she's weak. She's still just a child and her magic is weak too. She claims Rude is acting this way because he is an adult, strong, and must have been born that way. Rude only glances at her before leaving. Later, Rude is seen in the building, reading a diary that offers insight into Alan Duville's experience as a bard. The diary describes how Alan met Varner on a bright summer day while traveling with the head merchant toward the desert. They were unexpectedly attacked by a dragon, but when all hope seemed lost, they were saved by Varnar, who defeated the dragon using nothing but a dagger. Alan was enamored and decided to follow Varnar. The diary goes on to explain how Varnar proved to be a fitting hero, mastering sword, magic, and spiritual arts, and possessing a peculiar charm that drew people to him. Very few people were capable of fighting alongside Varnar. Only 6, aside from Velian and Elaine. 4 of them were strong enough to be true allies of Varnar: Diana Hapley, Killian Steros, Reynold Bernstein, and Arcania. Rude finds it strange that Arcania is included, as the others have significant lineages. After a long battle, the only dragon lords remaining are the Dragon of Martial Fists and the Dimension Dragon. Among the 7 dragons, these 2 are particularly strong, and the decisive battle against them is set to take place in the unknown ruins at the far end of the great forest of Irnim. However, everyone is exhausted from the long journey, struggling with fatigue, except for Varnar and Arcania, who appear unaffected and the same as usual. It is the day for the final battle. While other dragon slayers face the dragon army, the party of warriors decides to storm the dragon shrine. Alan begs Varnar to let him join, but only warriors are allowed to go. The warrior party returns victorious. Humanity has triumphed. However, Alan harbors suspicions about Varnar's decision to seal each of the 7 dragons instead of killing them. Even though he lacks the power to kill them, Alan doesn't understand why Varnar allowed the remaining dragonkin to live and simply banished them. What troubles him even more is that none of the warriors questioned Varnar's decision. After the battle, everyone in the warrior party goes their separate ways. That marks the end of the diary, which Rude doesn't find particularly useful. Rude then asks Peldrua if he must have known Alan Deville and the 7 dragons, including the white dragon that sent him back in time. He asks if Peldrua had a contract with warrior Varnar and must have met him in the dragon shrine, which is likely when he took the oath he mentioned when they first met. However, Peldrua replies that he can't tell Rude anything about that. At that moment, the fairy child approaches Rude, apologizing for what happened earlier. She asks if he could still help her just one more time, requesting his assistance in moving her mother somewhere where she can see the forest. The continent officially abolished slavery a long time ago, but fairies are still common targets for illegal slave hunters due to the high demand for their beautiful appearances and voices. Fairies are known to avoid interaction with other races, preferring to lead secluded lives deep within the forest. Their maturation process is long and slow, taking up to 150 years. Fairies were originally spirits that left the spiritual realm and settled in the mortal world long ago, which might explain why, when they die, both their bodies and souls return to the spiritual realm, leaving no trace of them behind. This is what is happening to the fairy mother, who disappears after gazing at the forest. Rude reflects on his previous timeline, recalling how the fairies chose to hide and stay silent instead of fighting the dragons. They insisted on maintaining a peaceful stance, even though it led to their eventual demise. Despite these thoughts, he can't help but console Renee, telling her that she needs to survive on her own. She can't keep crying, waiting for someone to help her. After his words, Rude leaves. However, Renee follows him, introducing herself as Renee of the Nastia tribe. She confesses that she has nowhere to go and needs to avoid being found by slave hunters. She asks if she can stay with him for a while, promising not to bother him and to help him with anything she can. Rude realizes that she could be in danger of hunters looking for escaped slaves, and remembers how she used magic to attack him earlier. He then asks her to teach him some magic. Renee replies that she can teach him, but she's only at the level of the second circle, and she believes Rude looks strong enough without needing that. Rude explains that the more skills he has, the better. It would take him a long time to learn everything from the beginning, so she can just teach him the basics. In exchange, he will find a safe place for her to stay. He also tells her to stop calling him Mr., as his body is 17 years old, and his name is Rude Donatos. Despite his request, Renee continues to call him Mr. Rude. They are later seen in the forest, where Renee continues explaining the basics of magic to Rude. She compares it to painting, except instead of using paint, he uses mana to create a spell by determining the nature and properties of the mana. She then asks him how many mana rings he has. Rude reveals that his mana resides in the heavenly domain, and Renee is surprised, realizing that he is the inheritor of the heavenly spearmanship. Renee continues, explaining that with the amount of mana he has, he should have no trouble controlling or restraining it. She walks him through the process of manifesting magic, and although Rude follows her instructions, he feels frustrated when the magic takes too long to materialize. Renee reassures him, telling him that even experienced mages struggle to make magic manifest faster than 2 seconds. Rude, growing discouraged, wonders if he should just give up, thinking it might be better to rely on his sword chi for battle rather than struggle with slow-to-manifest magic. But Renee encourages him, saying that he does have talent, She tells him she will go back to check some books to help him improve and scurries off to find a solution. Peldrua then offers to help Rude with his magic training, using the visual images that Rude has in his mind. Peldrua helps him materialize the magic without the need for any incantations. With Peldrua's assistance, Rude begins casting magic more efficiently and even starts stacking spells together. When Renee returns, she is shocked to see Rude casting magic and stacking multiple spells at once. However, her concern quickly escalates as she becomes agitated, warning him that if he loses control, even for a split second, things could go terribly wrong. As if on cue, Rude loses focus for just a moment, causing the magic to explode in a burst of energy. 2 weeks ago, at the Ibris Manor, the home of the wealthy magnate Jillian, Bulbic reports to his mercenary captain Valken Distier about Rude and the fact that Renee is with him. Jillian, hearing this, requests Valken to bring back Renee's mother, whom he claims is his love. Valken agrees, eager not only to carry out Jillian's request, but also to exact revenge on Rude. However, Hyman, a dark magician working for Jillian, warns Valken to be cautious. He reminds Valken that Rude is known and recognized by the imperial family and the press. Valken dismisses Hyman's concerns, stomping on a newspaper as he declares that Rude is no hero but a murderer. Without further hesitation, Valken storms off to find Rude, with Hyman deciding to take measures to prepare for Valken's approach, knowing that Valken isn't heeding his warning. At the same time, in the Duville Manor, Rude is practicing magic. Although he has caused multiple explosions within the building, his skills are improving. Renee, worried about the destruction, advises him to focus on practicing water spells instead of dangerous explosive magic. As she walks towards him, another explosion occurs, causing chaos. Rude yells at her to get down, and the entire building is left in ruins. Shortly after, Valken and his team arrive at the manor. They find Renee unscathed, but shaken, having been protected by Rude's sword during the explosion. Valken, furious, roughly handles Renee, slapping her and demanding to know where her mother is. Renee calmly replies that her mother has returned to the forest. Valken then asks about Rude, but Renee remains silent. In that moment, Rude suddenly appears behind Valken, launching an attack that creates another explosion. The two combatants quickly separate, but Rude is affected by a curse placed by Hyman during the previous explosion. However, thanks to an artifact he wears, Rude is shielded from the curse's full effect, and he attacks again, this time with a sword that causes explosions on contact with blood. As the other fighters dash toward Rude, he retaliates swiftly by attacking with his sword, resulting in a massive explosion that sends shockwaves through the area. The explosion leaves a deep impact, causing the attackers to stagger, and some are momentarily disoriented. Rude, having stacked his magic together, then unleashes a devastating attack, sending a wave of destructive force toward Valken and his team. Valken, still shaken from the surprise attack, struggles to comprehend how Rude is able to combine both swordsmanship and magic so effectively. His mind races, trying to understand the full extent of Rude's power and how he has mastered it so quickly. Before Valken can process the situation further, Rude appears behind him with terrifying speed, placing the edge of his sword at Valken's neck. His voice cold and calm, Rude speaks, "It's been a while." Renee is shocked that Rude actually defeats all the members of the whole mercenary company, with the captain having the sword at his neck, wondering who Rude is and how he is so powerful. The sword that Rude is using is the Crimson Blade, which bursts each time it touches another sword. Rude then asks Valken why he is angry at him, when he is the one who got stabbed in the back 5 years ago. However, Valken retorts that he treated Rude like his own son, but Rude killed half of the members back then and yet came to Ibris again. Rude is confused about what Valken is saying, to which Valken explains that Rude killed their fellow mercenaries just because they were having fun with a nameless fugitive, and he also got a scar on his face. Rude is shocked. He realizes something is wrong. In his previous life, he wasn't the one who killed half of the mercenaries, despite being treated like a son, as he was the nameless refugee back then. After losing their family, he and his brother wandered aimlessly before joining the Wild Dogs mercenary company in Ibris, where Asir was strong enough to have a decent position, and all Rude could do was cling to him for safety. When Asir returned and saw that, he massacred half of the Wild Dogs mercenary company and scarred Valken's face. Asir had to do this and left, as his arrest was ordered. Before he left, he entrusted Rude to someone, and Rude ended up alone. Years passed before he learned about his brother's whereabouts. However, Rude realizes that in this world, where Asir doesn't exist, he has taken his brother's place and done the deeds. Rude then deals with Valken, at which point Renee runs over, urging him to run because Valken is one of the men working for Jillian, who torments her and her mother. She explains that the whole estate is full of other mercenaries, and there is even a dark magician. Rude asks her to show him the way to the estate. Renee yells at him, telling him he is supposed to run away. However, Rude replies that he will teach her 2 things, they must always repay when received. The first is kindness, and the other is striking first when attacked. Meanwhile, at Jillian's estate, Jillian and Hyman watch the whole scenario unfold, seeing how Valken was dealt with by Rude and feeling powerless to intervene. Jillian becomes scared and asks Hyman to make himself useful and deal with Rude. Hyman has no choice but to agree, as he still needs funds from Jillian for his research. He assures Jillian that they have something up their sleeves, which makes Jillian feel relieved as he recalls what he terms the masterpiece of Hyman's research. Rude arrives at Jillian's estate with Renee's help and deals with the mercenaries there. As the remaining mercenaries try to flee, they are attacked by demons, which Rude recognizes as chimeras, creatures created by magically combining all sorts of animals. He notices that the chimeras are even attacking their own allies. Rude quickly tells Renee to find somewhere to hide and draws his sword when he spots an artificial dragonkin. Without hesitation, he charges at it with his crimson blade. However, Renee runs over, calling out that she knows the artificial dragonkin. It is Master Herta, the guardian of their tribe. Herta attacks, but Rude dodges with Renee, realizing that Herta is quite skilled but has lost his sense of self. Rude decides to use some techniques he developed on the battlefield in his previous life to deal with Herta. After taking several hits, Herta is on the brink of collapse. Just as Rude is about to deliver a critical strike, he is intercepted by dark lightning from above. Hyman, hovering in the sky with a massive magical circle, is responsible for the attack. Peldrua calls out to Rude, offering his assistance, but Rude declines, confident that he can handle it himself. He explains that he's outside of Hyman's range of attack, but Hyman is within his own. Rude launches an air slash aimed at Hyman in the sky, which devours Hyman's dark magic. Undeterred, Rude follows up with another air slash, striking Hyman directly, causing a shockwave in the sky. Hyman is seen falling from the sky, affected by the mana reflux from Rude's attack. Rude remarks that it's pointless for Hyman to have the grade of the 6th circle when his body is weaker than a 6-year-old's. Hyman is shocked by the fact that Rude casts greater magic at the 6th circle level almost instantaneously, finding it ridiculous. However, Hyman plans to escape using teleportation, as he still has enough mana for it. But Rude won't allow him to flee, and is about to eliminate Hyman. In a desperate move, Hyman calls out to Herta, who defends the attack. Hyman uses the opportunity to shove Herta toward Rude while he escapes with teleportation. However, Herta is stabbed by Rude's attack, which shatters his core, ensuring he cannot survive. Renee rushes over to Herta, but Rude stops her, warning that it is still dangerous. Rude knows that Herta must have been quite powerful when he was alive, as being a guardian is no easy task. He also realizes that Hyman couldn't have taken down Herta alone. As Herta fades away, Renee recalls how caring he had been when they were together. Overcome with rage, she asks Rude if their enemies have escaped. Rude replies that they couldn't have gone far, given their injuries. They set off in pursuit, with Renee determined to seek revenge.